I was walking my dog in a wooded area near my house. It was early evening and beginning to get dark. As I walked, I could hear something moving through the wilderness in the woods parallel to me, but I couldn't see what it was. The noise it made sounded like a cross between a gorilla and a hyena. It was growling and screeching. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I began to run. As I ran, I could hear the thing running after me, crashing through the underbrush. I thought for sure it was going to catch me, but then it stopped following me and went back into the woods. I had my son's baseball bat with me. After the first time it chased me, I dropped it. I was so scared that I didn't go back to get it. I have had several sightings of something large and hairy, usually between 6 o'clock in the evening and about 3 or 4 in the morning. Once at home, there were also loud howls outside our house right around midnight, which woke us all up. We checked outside and saw nobody, but heard loud footfalls in the nearby woods. A couple of weeks later, we were awakened by howling around 3 a.m., and several hours after, my husband and I saw a large dark shape moving behind some trees in our backyard. I've seen these things twice, up close and in person. Once I was at a park with my dog and 2 friends, and we witnessed this creature moving, no more than 20 feet away. We thought at first it was a man, due to the way it walked, and we could see its enormous gait and long arms which swung like a monkey's would, only very fast and powerful looking. It also made loud grunting noises as it moved through the brush very quickly. This took place in Colorado, in a place called Spring Canyon. I went out coon hunting with my friends. I'm not one to believe in the unknown, but this changed my views on some things. Myself and 3 of my friends had piled into a ranger-type vehicle with our hounds. We were hunting for raccoons that night. With us was my dad's dog, who placed closest to the passenger door of the truck. My dad's dog is a blue tick hound and is quite big for his breed. He's a running hound, meaning that he runs his prey down instead of cornering it to run it out. He has extremely good stamina and is very strong for his size. I've taken him coon hunting many times and have never seen him quit on me more than once. My dad's been hunting his whole life. He's never seen anything he could not kill with a gun. He's also a Vietnam veteran and has killed more than his fair share of men. He's also an extremely religious man and is convinced there is no way the creature he saw was of this earth. As we're driving down this backcountry road, all of a sudden, the dog jumps out of the truck and takes off into the woods. We all jump out to go get him, and as we're running towards where he went, we hear this other noise in the woods. It sounded like something was running at us, but way faster than any man or animal could run. My friend got camera shy and turned back towards the truck when he heard it coming towards us. We all ran for our lives and lost it. We got inside the truck. As we're getting in, my dad caught a glimpse of what he saw. It was standing there, at the edge of the woodline, watching us run away. His claim was that it looked like a large gorilla but had longer arms and smaller eyes. They were almost kind of glowing this ominous color. My dad has always been skeptical about this stuff, but after what he saw, which was less than 100 yards away, he's now fully convinced that there are things out there that are not of this earth. We always joke with him about it because the dude is well known for his drinking and smoking back in our hometown. So you can imagine how much more ribbing we got out of him when the old hunting stories came out. That, of course, is long before he became a Christian. So we're riding back towards my dad's house and we start talking about what we saw. I've always also been skeptical of this kind of thing, but now I would consider myself a true believer. We all had witnessed something that was beyond our power to explain through any logical means. The only problem was, if anybody who did not see it with their own eyes found out about it, they would think we're all crazy. As we're driving, my friend's dad starts singing a gospel song at the top of his lungs. My friend in the back seat starts punching him, saying, "Shut up, you're going to get us killed if that thing hears us." We had to go back later on and retrieve our dog, who was wandering around there. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I do believe in God. and I've always been what you would call a skeptic, and I don't like to just take things at face value. So, I've always been somebody who wants to know the explanations for things. And up until this experience, I've never had an experience that I couldn't really explain. And all this is kind of what motivated me to start trying to find answers. It was summertime in Colorado Springs. My family and I went to a flea market in downtown. We parked the car, and we're walking into the store, and my mother was acting strange. She turned to me and said, "Don't let go of my hand. I don't want anything to happen to you." And I looked around, and there was nothing around us that would make her feel that way. Keep in mind, I'm also a grown man. So we go into the store, and we shop around for a while, and the entire time she's acting very paranoid, very weird. We left the store. As we're walking to the car, I asked her why she would say something like that, and she said she didn't know what I was talking about. She did not remember saying anything to me like that. Well, later on in the car, I kept asking her why she had acted so strange in the store. She then explained to me that there were these dark shadows watching over her and trying to get her. She told me she sees them all the time. They're trying to steal her soul. Now, my mother's a very coherent and intelligent person. There's no way she would make something like this up. This experience really shook me. I'd never really seen my mother like this before. This was a side of her that I'd never seen, and it was scary. I did have a very religious upbringing, so, to me, God was an old man with white hair, and he lived up in the sky somewhere. And angels were guys that played harps around his throne, and that's what I'd always pictured. And then when I had this experience, it completely changed my perspective of who or what God might be. Because I experienced something that was so much more powerful than anything I could have imagined. And so, after the experience, I decided to start reading about other people's experiences and try to understand what happened. And over the course of about 6 months, I read several different books on near-death experiences. I got very passionate when it comes to science. I think there are so many things we don't know, and many things that we know in our lives that we simply cannot begin to understand. So, when I began reading about near-death experiences and the different explanations that were out there, I was just engrossly fascinated. There are a lot of people who say that near-death experiences are nothing more than hallucinations caused by the brain en masse. I can understand how somebody might come to that conclusion because it's something that we don't have any real understanding of. But I think it's a little bit limiting to say that all near-death experiences are just hallucinations. There are too many people who have had these types of experiences who don't seem to be hallucinating. When I was younger, my mother had a very bad experience with demonic possession in our family. It was something that really terrified her, and I wonder if these demons somehow attached themselves to my mother. So, when she started seeing these shadows around her and was terrified, unfortunately, at the time, we did not have any real understanding of what was happening. She thought she was either going crazy, or that somebody had hexed her or put a voodoo curse on her, and we needed to find out what the person was. It broke my heart. I could tell how much fear and anguish this situation was causing her, and there was nothing I could do about it. I couldn't understand why these shadows were so intent on watching her, and I was determined to find out what or who they are. I remember at the time going to the library and trying to read every book I could get my hands on. Everything that was there in terms of information. And nowhere did I ever see anything remotely like what she was describing to me, so I knew she was not making this up. Now, it's important to note as well, my mother's side of the family has a long history of demonic activity and possession. It's something we don't really like to talk about because it's been such a source of pain and anguish for all of us. But I'd say about 20 years ago, my mother was possessed or believed to be possessed by a demon, and that itself was a terrifying experience. We had to call in a priest to exorcise the demon, and it was a really traumatic event for all of us. So, when my mother talked about seeing the shadows around her, she automatically assumed it was another demon, and she was terrified. This was in the early 2000s, by the way. And unfortunately, at the time, we did not have any understanding of what was going on. So right now, I'm just trying to process and learn more about exorcism so that I can rightfully help my mother. I know that it's something that's going to take a lot of time and effort, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get her better. I was 14 or 15. I had friends that lived out in the country, and we would go to their house after school and hang out for a while, and then walk back into town, maybe a mile away. It was this large open field with a playground in the center. And then, around the playground there, were apartments. The apartments that we would hang out at were by the outskirts of this field and backed up to a very small wooded area. There was also a ditch that went from back of our apartments. We were all walking down this dirt road that went through the woods when we all stopped at once, because one of my friends said they had heard something. We all stood there quiet, trying to listen for a few moments. We could not figure out what it was. We began walking again, and I was in the back of the group. I heard it before anybody else, so I stopped and whispered for everybody to stop. It sounded like a child sobbing. It sounded like it was coming from the woods to our left. We all stood there, looking into the trees, and just kept going. Quiet for a few seconds, and then the sobbing continued. We all looked at one another. Then we ran as fast as we could back down the road and did not look back until we got to my friend's house. We were all so terrified, we were white as ghosts, and we were shaking from head to toe. We never went back there again. We all sat in the living room and tried to rationalize what we had heard. We all came to the same conclusion that it was a child crying. Maybe somebody had got lost in the woods. My friend's dad loaded his shotgun, and we all went back out there with flashlights, calling out for anybody who needed help. We didn't find anything and went back home empty-handed and more freaked out than we first were when we went. I think that whatever we heard out there was not human. In 2009, I was out hiking with my now wife, and it was a beautiful day. I just happened to be looking off to the side, and I saw this creature. It was standing there like a human being, but its head was more like an animal. It had these bright blue eyes, and it stared at me. It didn't let me look at it for long. It was only about 20-30 feet away from me, but I got a pretty good look at it, and then it just disappeared right into the woodline. I'm not sure if what exactly I saw could be considered a cryptid, but I know for a fact it was not a human being. Let me tell you about how it looked. It was the size of a human. It had a head like an animal, bright blue eyes, and just kind of disappeared. This thing's features definitely wasn't something you'd see every day, and it made a very big impression on me. I'm still not sure what it could have been, but it stayed with me for a long time. Anyway, I know Colorado has its share of cryptid sightings, and after hearing stories like this, I'm not sure what to believe anymore. Do you think there could be something out there? Something we just can't explain, or is it all just a mere coincidence that me and my wife have had these sightings? I was about 18 years old, living in Loveland, Colorado at the time, and my roommates and I were all up late one evening, watching TV. We had the shades open in our room, and we saw this ball of light that was moving around. It wasn't really scary, but it was definitely weird. And then, about a year ago, I was out in the middle of nowhere, driving to visit some friends, and I saw this Black Panther-like creature kind of crossing near the road. It was huge, at least as tall as me, and just sleek and black and fast. I didn't know it wasn't a bobcat or anything, and lots of people were saying things like it was either a bear or possibly a mountain lion, but it did not look like any of those things. It looked like a large black cat. Like a black panther, just huge and red eyes. I'll never forget either how its eyes glowed in the moonlight. They were red, tinted, and it moved swiftly and fluidly. Anyway, I know there's not much to my sighting, but I thought you would think it was interesting, all the stuff I've seen in Colorado. I'm a 38-year-old woman, married for 10 years with 2 young children. I have always been interested in the paranormal and have had some personal experiences that cannot be explained. I've never read about alien abductions or seen a UFO. I have nothing to gain from this, so please try and be open-minded. I promise that everything in the following paragraphs is true and correct to the best of my knowledge. This could not have happened, I know that, and has shaken me to my core and will affect me easily for the rest of my life. As unbelievable as it sounds, I believe that I know what happened. Just out of curiosity, has anybody ever heard of an alien abduction? I never have until this happened. In the early morning hours of July 3rd, 2016, my family and I were camping in the mountains near our home in Colorado. I should also mention I'm a very outdoorsy person and love camping and hiking. We were maybe only about 5 miles in total in a remote area where this took place. That night, we stayed up with our friends around a campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories. I remember going to bed pretty late, probably around midnight or so, watching the stars. I was woken up by a feeling similar to somebody watching me. I woke my husband, who also felt it and said he saw something in the woods right towards our tent. He thought it was just some friends playing around and didn't know, so he went back to sleep. I could not fall back asleep, so I watched the fire and was kind of half asleep. I heard what sounded like noises, like somebody walking by our tent, as if they were looking inside. Then, what sounded like it came closer and circling around our tent to behind me, where I now felt it was not just observing me, but where it was standing behind me. Very slowly, I opened my eyes and could just barely make out a dark figure or silhouette that seemed human-like, except it had larger rounded shoulders with one arm held against its body, as if it were holding something. It stood there for what felt like several minutes before I finally closed my eyes and tried to go back to sleep. The next thing I remember is waking up again, and this time it was daylight. My husband was snoring beside me, and our children were asleep in their tents. I couldn't believe, and I thought it was all just a dream, but there was no logical explanation for what I had experienced. I had never felt so alone and vulnerable in my life, and I can't stop thinking about it. I kept wondering if it was a dream or something real. I don't know what to do with the information now. I've never seen anything like it before, so I can't really give much detail on its appearance. It did not look human, but I couldn't tell you what it did look like because it happened so fast. I feel scared just thinking about it, and my husband does not want to go back camping again. He believes me. I know this sounds crazy, but I believe that I was abducted by an alien. I've also not talked to anybody about this yet. I don't know how to. I don't want people to think I'm crazy, and it's hard to even believe myself. This has changed the way that I view the world and think about life. But I know what happened to me, so it must be true. Even though I'm a single mom of 2 kids, I've always been an avid camper and lover of the outdoors, but now I feel almost afraid to go outside because of what happened. This has shaken my belief system in every real way. I feel very confused when I woke up. It was like I suddenly realized the world is much bigger than how I always seen it, and I could not figure out why. I kept thinking that it's all real and happening to more people in the world. Why else would you see so many UFO sighting reports or alien abduction stories all around the world? I want to know what really happens in these cases and the truth about aliens. Everything in my life feels different now. The way I see myself and the way I see my children, everything has changed. I think I was chosen by an alien for this experience because of how I felt about them before. That's just my theory, though. I hope you can understand why I had to tell somebody about what happened to me. I was born in San Francisco, California. Lived in the Bay Area until 1969, when my father bought a house in Castle Rock, Colorado. My father was an infantry soldier in World War II, and he retired from the military to work for Lockheed Martin at their Waterton Canyon facility. My grandmother came to live with us to help take care of us while our parents were at work. My mother was a stay-at-home mom, but only for a period. My father constantly was working swing shifts. I remember the valley where I lived was an ancient burial ground, supposedly. And when I was a kid, we lived in a medium-sized house in Castle Rock. I'm now 52. I have never told anybody about this experience until recently. At the time, it frightened me so much that I had trouble sharing this with my girlfriends even. My grandmother, who lived with us at the time, told me not to talk about it and scolded me for acting foolishly. She also said we didn't see anything. I was having a sleepover. At about 3 a.m, I woke up to a large human-sized figure, glowing and white, walking by me as if it wasn't walking but gliding, like it was on ice skates. It stopped momentarily, turned to watch us, and continued to move in a slow momentum out the bedroom door, which was closed. I screamed, and in turn, waking up all my friends, and they all saw it. In the same bedroom, there was a small dressing table with a mirror. I had been sitting at that dressing table earlier in the evening, putting on makeup when suddenly the lights went out, and no amount of coaxing or fiddling with the light switch would bring it back. This had happened several times in the past as well, so we just turned the lights off and went to bed. Now, I believe that figure that came into my room was possibly the spirit of one of the ancient Indians from long ago. I was too scared to get out of bed, but the next thing I knew, it disappeared. It seemed like no more than a minute or two went by. After that, only the girls saw the figure making its way through our bedroom door into my room. One of my parents came to pick them up, and one girl begged her parents to take her home. The next day is when my grandmother told me never to talk about it, and we didn't really see anything like that again. To this day, I've not really spoken to anybody about what happened until recently. This is the first time I've ever written it down. Sorry if it's hard to understand. I've tried my best to write it coherently and cohesively. I was out of town, driving on a long dirt road, and nothing around for miles. I was going about 40 miles an hour when something large landed in the middle of the road, about 200 yards ahead of me. This thing obviously did not want to be seen. It had stayed low to the ground and moved very fast. I was doing roughly 40 miles an hour, and this thing covered about 200 yards in a matter of seconds. I had my high beams on so I could see what was approaching. At this point, I think something with huge wings or bat-like. It moved very quickly and not like any bird or plane I've ever seen before. It made the hair on my arms and back of my neck stand up, and I remember thinking, what the heck is that? It disappeared into the trees on the other side of the road, so I turned around and headed back in the direction I came from about a mile or so. There were no houses, no lights on this dirt road. This is when it gets weird. I start to hear this thumping sound, almost like the wings hitting the air as it flew toward me. My first thought was that there must have been two of these things and one was coming at me from each side of the road. I sped up. The sound got louder. I was driving about 80 miles an hour by this point, and this thing was still keeping up with me. It finally disappeared into the woods on the other side of the road. I have no idea why that happened. Maybe it got hit by my car, or maybe it just disappeared into the woods. I drove all the way home without speeding after this. I was a little shaken up, and my heart was pounding out of my chest. That's when I realized I had to call a friend and tell him what had happened, to not go out at night by himself. And my friend, the one who saw the same thing, said he would never go out at night by himself again either. I can send you the audio I made. The quality is not great, but it's something my friend took after I called him to tell what happened. It was very windy that night, and it's kind of what you hear in the recording. Also, I remember a few weeks after this incident took place, my friend told me that he saw strange lights in the backyard, went outside to see what was going on. He said these lights flashed at him as if they were warning him, then disappeared. I know he is not the only one who has seen these. I feel like it has something to do with what we saw that night. I grew up in Colorado Springs, so the mountains are basically my backyard. I've hiked most of them at one point or another during my life, and I'm very comfortable in the wilderness. I'm also a pretty avid outdoorsman and have been hunting, including archery hunting, since I was old enough to hold a gun. I'm looking for advice on what to do now. I know what I saw, but it's not something you can easily go tell people about without sounding crazy. I want to be able to figure out if there is any kind of reasonable explanation for this or not. At first, I thought it was a werewolf. It was standing on two legs, but its back was hunched over, and its arms were very long. It had hair covering its face, and it appeared to have a mix of animal and human features. I also could not tell if it was male or female. On Tuesday night, at around 9 p.m. CST, July 17, 2005, a friend and I went outside to a field just outside of Denver. It was dark already, and there was a storm rolling in. The area is surrounded by steep hills and has a 4-lane highway running next to it. This is a very popular area with mountain bikers and people going four-wheeling, etc. There are also some abandoned buildings all throughout the area, as well as an old cemetery that's been vandalized by carvings and gravestones, and gang symbols and graffiti. I should also add that I'm into anything paranormal and have been investigating the supernatural since I was a late teen. I'm also an animal rights activist for most of my adult life and have volunteered with a number of different animal rescue organizations. But anyway, that's all fluff. I was out in the pasture with my friend when I saw it. We were just about to leave and I see this thing standing about 80 yards away from us. It was completely dark by then, so I had a hard time seeing it in detail, but I could see how large it was and how hairy it was, and that it had a really weird face. I did not have my camera with me, so taking a picture was rough. My friend did not believe me at first when I told him what I saw. It appeared to be about 5 feet tall. It was kind of hunched over and was coming out of some kind of strange tree line that I could not see. I don't know what it was, but I'm pretty sure it was some sort of dog. I've never seen anything like it before in my life. I mean, at first, I thought it was a werewolf, just because it was standing on two legs. But its back was so hunched over and how long its arms were, it looked too strange. The eyes were a really bright green, and the mouth looked like it was twisted into a snarl. Its head moved to face us for a second and then turned back towards the other way. The best way I can describe it really is the face looked more extremely distorted. Human features, but little bits of animal mixed in. It had large fangs and really big ears. We watched it for about a minute or two, and then my friend got more freaked out as I told him about it. And I know this sounds weird, but my friend is the one who wanted to leave. He was scared. I would have stayed watching it for hours if I could have, no matter how I felt about it. I don't know what it was. And we've also been coming out to this area for a couple of years now. I don't remember ever seeing anything weird around here before, except for that time I had my car broken into. But that's a different story. I don't know if what I saw was a werewolf or something that was just half man, half animal, but I think it might be worth investigating. If there is some kind of strange wildlife in the area, we should either try to learn to deal with it or maybe get rid of it. This is also not the first time I've seen something like this. In fact, a few years ago, I saw what I believed to be a creature outside my apartment. When it turned to face me, it was this distorted human-looking face, but also looked animalistic. Maybe it was some kind of demonic entity that's been hanging around the area for a while and starting to show itself more. I don't know what it is, but I'm trying to prepare myself for more of these. I've only told this story before to a few friends, and they all think I'm making it up. I know what I saw, and it wasn't anything normal. I've never seen this thing before. I'm still learning how to process my emotions on it all. I was really scared when it happened, even though I'd try and watch it for more if I could, but now I'm just confused. I also did not find any evidence when I was out there, but I did find the tracks by cemetery. They looked like large canid tracks. When I was out there looking around, I saw some big paw prints that looked like they belonged to a large bipedal wolf, and they appeared to lead off into the woods for a while and just suddenly stopped. Look, I'm probably not going to go out there again by myself. If anybody wants to volunteer and come with me, I'll be happy to go back out there and take a look. I don't know what to do, though. I'm scared by whatever I saw and am worried it might come back. I think I should maybe try and find out more about this. I want to be prepared in case there really is some kind of danger in the area. It's probably best if I know what it is. I'm just not sure what to think about it. It was definitely weird, and I don't know if I'm ready to go back there and face whatever it is that I saw. I also don't think this is something we can easily brush off. If there is some kind of strange animal hybrid in the area, this needs to be taken care of. I was hiking around Hillgard State Park here in Utah and got a little lost. It was about 5:30 p.m. The sun was setting, and I knew it'd be dark soon, so I decided to climb up an extremely steep hill to get my bearings and find my way back to the trail. When I finally reached the top of this hill, which had no trees, just rocks all around, I saw something that still gives me goosebumps when I remember what happened. A large black thing with an enormous wingspan came swooping down at me from above. My first thought was panic, then soiling myself, and then finally, oh my gosh, what is that? It made a sharp turn and flew right over me again. This thing looked exactly like a gargoyle that you would see in a horror movie. It had a long, thin snout, red eyes, and glared right at me. I was terrified and began running down the hill as fast as I could. I looked back over my shoulder and saw this gargoyle flying after me in pursuit, so I ran even faster. I finally made it back to the trail and did not stop running until I got all the way back to my car. When I got home, I did some research on gargoyles and found they are often depicted with wings. Could this have been a real-life gargoyle that I saw in Hillgard Mountain Park? If so, what was it doing there? I have so many questions and virtually no answers. If anybody has any information on this, please let me know. I'm still trying to process what has happened. I'm not sure if I can go back to that park ever again. First off, the events here took place in September of 2010. My friend, whose name is Joe, told me this story after I said I was curious about UFOs. Joe lives right outside of Salt Lake City, Utah, and works as a handyman for whatever comes his way. His father worked at Hill Air Force Base, but has recently retired. It was the middle of the night when Joe got up to use restroom, which was located in his garage connected to his house via a sliding door/window combo thingy. Oh yeah, it's late fall, so it's cold out already. Anyways, he noticed something strange outside when he was heading back to bed through his window. This same window overlooks the front lawn of their home. What caught his attention was that there were these 3 bright stars that were just sitting there in the sky. He knew they weren't stars and he was curious about them, so he grabbed a coat and went outside to investigate. As he got closer, he could tell that these things were hovering just above the ground, not more than 10 feet off of it. They were round and silver, with a black center, like an eye, but they did not emit any light on them. Joe was terrified but also fascinated. He slowly approached one of them, while trying not to make too much noise. As he got close, it began to spin faster, and then shot up into the sky at an incredible speed. The other 2 did the same thing. Within seconds, they were gone. In the meantime, Joe's next-door neighbor was also outside investigating these strange objects. His dog wouldn't stop going crazy, and he too walked up to a sphere and got a better look at it before it flew and dissipated. When Joe got back inside, he told me there was this weird feeling that came over him as he stood in front of those things. It filled him with fear, but excitement all at the same time. He felt as if he touched it, something terrible would happen. This experience had scared him so bad that his hair began falling out from stress shortly thereafter. His wife had said she'd find hairs all over the house. Now, he refuses to talk about it altogether. There's actually 2 separate accounts for this one. The first, my girlfriend and I were driving home from visiting some family in Utah. As we neared our home in the foothills of the Wasatch Mountains, we both saw a large bat-like creature perched atop a power pole. We both gasped, as it was easily the size of a small airplane. The wingspan must have been at least 20 feet, if not more. We drove closer, trying to get a better look at this terrifying yet bizarre sight. And just as we got within 100 yards of it, the creature spread its wings as if to show off its immense size. And just then, it took off into the air, disappearing off in the night. It was amazing to watch it fly, as its wings generated enough lift to carry its massive body easily. We had later learned that a UFO had supposedly crashed near our town just hours prior. We couldn't help but wonder if this giant bat was connected to it. Some people are saying that this bat is actually a species of cryptid, while others say it's directly connected to the UFO. I guess we'll just have to wait and see if anybody can get a close enough look. So, there it is. That's my story. My wife and I don't really tell people about this because it was so startling and terrifying. If we try to come out and tell anybody about this, well, we'd probably get laughed at or kicked off of Facebook. Now, this second account was from an older gentleman who noticed the first account posted on Reddit. He said he'd seen this creature too, and this was his story. I work for a power company, and I was working on an outage in my truck up in Castle Valley, Utah, when I saw it. It was around noon on my lunch break, so the sun was high in the sky. From what I could tell, I saw what appeared to be a giant bat-like thing with big eyes and grayish skin. I only got to see it for roughly 10 seconds before it flew off over the mountains. But during that time, I got a pretty decent look at it. Just as the guy said in his other story, this thing was huge, winged, and a wingspan of over at least 20 feet. Anyway, I went back to work and one of my coworkers asked if I saw that thing too. He told me he had heard about it on the radio earlier that day, and even some theories that he had speculated about it. He thinks it's a creature. I've lived in Castle Valley my whole life. I've never seen anything like that before. So, if anybody can get close enough to possibly get some evidence, we may just finally have proof that things exist beyond our realm of understanding and comprehension. I was reading an article about the Bigfoot sightings, and I have something to share. I was out hiking in the Clear Creek Mountain area in Utah on July 12th, and I saw what I can only describe as a man-like flying humanoid. It was early evening, and I had just crested a ridge when I saw it hovering about 100 yards away. From what I could tell, it was roughly 6 feet tall and had a man-like body and head. But the arms were too short, and it had a large circular head with no features that I could see. It was gray in color, and looked like it was made of metal or some other shiny material. It did not have any wings or propellers that I could see. It was just kind of hovering there. I was terrified and ran the other direction. I have not been able to stop thinking about it since. I can't say for sure what I saw, but it definitely wasn't anything that I've ever seen before. Do you have any idea what it could have been? Also, back in 1976, my father and I were camping and fishing in the Tushar Mountains near Beaver, Utah. We had not caught any fish, so we decided to go looking for some deeper pools where we might have better luck. We hiked up a pretty steep grade and found a nice pool that looked like it'd be perfect for some good fishing. We put our poles down. My dad was getting ready to cast when he noticed something strange about the pool. It was almost like there was steam coming off of it, but he realized it was far too cold to be steam. We were already pretty high up and thought maybe it was just some geothermal heat bubbling up from underground. He kept looking at the odd cloud above the water and was about to say something when he stopped. He just stood there looking for a minute before asking me if I'd seen it too. I hadn't, so he told me to stay where I was for a while, and he went down closer to the pool. He didn't want me getting too close, because it still looked like heat was coming off the water, but he wanted to take a closer inspection. I watched him as he walked down to the pool, and then I saw it. He stopped in his tracks, and began waving his arms around like he was trying to fly. I thought he was playing around, but he started yelling for me to come down there. It took me a few seconds to get my feet moving, and by the time I got down to him, he was already laying on his back. He kept telling me that it wasn't heat coming off the water, and we needed to leave right away. I had asked him what had happened, and he said something about how he had been attacked. He didn't have any visible cuts or bruising, but he was scared and began to act very sick. I helped him up. He told me something had tried to take him. I asked him what he meant, but he just explained there was something in the water. The following day, my dad, who refused to talk about what had happened, came down with a really bad fever that would not break. It got so bad that he became delirious. After taken to the hospital and he was admitted, he stayed there for roughly 3 weeks, give or take, before coming home. He never really recovered and refused to ever talk about what had happened to him. There was something in that water that did something to him. He died about 6 months after this from, apparently, the doctors were convinced that there was a rare virus he must have picked up in the mountains. I don't buy it. I think it was something paranormal, although I have nothing to back up that claim. First, some info on me. I'm a radio DJ for a station here in Utah, and I do promotional events. And my fiancée works at a bank here in Salt Lake City, so I have to travel around quite a bit at weird times of the night and morning. A few months back, I was dispatched to an area outside of Providence, Utah. They wanted me there at 3 a.m. No problem. It's just a promo for a new mattress store that's opening. I get there before any of the employees and try my best not to look like somebody who's been driving all night. It didn't work. I go into the pitch-black building where the event is supposed to be held, set up my table with CDs and other swag, and sit down and wait. About 10 minutes later, a car comes screeching into the parking lot with its high beams on full blare. So bright, I have to turn my head. An older man is driving and he pulls up right next to me right away. "Hey man, you need to leave now," he says through the open passenger window. Instantly, I'm annoyed by this guy's tone of voice, especially since I've been doing nothing wrong. "Excuse me?" I say back sharply as I stand up from my chair. "Why are you telling me that?" I continue. "You're scaring off my customers," he says with disgust in his voice, as if some kind of thug or something. I'm about to say something back, but then I see them, walking slowly towards the building. Their eyes are as black as coal, are a group of 5 black-eyed kids. Instantly, all the hair on my body stands up, and I've never been so scared in my life. The older man sees them too, and starts cursing at them, telling them to go away. They don't listen, and keep coming closer. Finally, the man gets out of his car, and starts yelling at them to leave. They just keep standing there and staring at him, with those soulless, haunting eyes. Eventually, the kids turn and walk back to their car and drive away. The entire thing lasted maybe, at max, 5 minutes. I was shaken up by it, and I called my fiancée and asked her to come pick me up, even though she told me not to go because of the weird hour. I've tried to do some research online, but have not found out anything about this, except for a couple of other people who have shared similar experiences with people called black-eyed kids. What are your thoughts, opinions, or knowledge about this subject? I like to consider myself a huge fan of the outdoors. I've spent a lot of time in the backcountry, specifically at Bryce Canyon National Park in Utah State. I'm also a proud amateur photographer. Anyway, here's my story. A few weeks ago, on a beautiful, shining Sunday morning, I decided to take a drive out to the park to do some wildlife photography. While out there, I parked at one of the overlooks and began taking photos. As I was shooting, I noticed something moving in the bush below me. At first, I thought it was a deer, but as it got closer, I realized it was something else entirely. The creature was about 4 feet tall and had a very strange appearance. Its skin was a deep green color, and its head was more elongated. Very similar to a snake's, actually, but it moved more like a hominid or an ape would, swinging its arms back and forth and kind of scampering on all fours. It reminded me very much the way a gorilla would move. At first, I was convinced it was reptilian of some sort, but until I saw it move. It got pretty close to me, actually, maybe 10 feet. I realized that it had very unique hands and claws with elongated, exaggerated fingers. This thing locked eyes with me for probably a good 20 seconds, and then scampered off in the direction behind where my car was parked. I kept watching. I was curious what it would do. Maybe this sounds strange or crazy, but I swear that when it ran past my car, that's when its snake-like head turned around long enough to make eye contact with me again. Its eyes were big and black. I did not see any white in them at all. It was very thin, small mouth, which was also closed during the entire encounter. At this point, I didn't know what to do, so I just sat there staring back at it, confused and perplexed about what I was seeing. It felt like after 30 seconds of my staring, it turned and disappeared, moving uphill, which is where most of the hiking trails are located in this area. Now, a few days later, I came up to Bryce Canyon again for more photography. Oh, and by the way, the reason I didn't end up taking any pictures of this thing is because I was in such shock. Anyway, this time on the weekday, there was practically nobody out there in these parts of the park. When I got to the spot to where I had originally seen the creature, something just seemed different about its location. There were marks on some of the trees where it had been I'm assuming clawing on. There were also large prints in the dirt, which I took several photos of. Now, I'm not sure what to make of all this, but it has definitely been on my mind a lot lately. Could this have been some sort of experiment? Maybe an escaped primate, reptilian genetic experiment? Or is it possible I just saw something out of my imagination? I've never seen anything like this before and would love to know what others think. Okay, last email, I swear. My father actually just told me this. But when he was 16, back in 1969, he lived on the outskirts of Springville, Utah. One night, he and his buddies were out partying with some girls of them. They all decided to go back to my grandfather's ranch house just outside town to continue drinking beer. While driving down this old dirt road, they saw what appeared to be like a large ape-like creature that ran parallel with their car. It ducked into some thicket right by the side of the road. So before it did that, their view of this thing was pretty good for about 10 seconds before it finally vanished into another group of thicket and trees on a different side of the road. My father and his friends all talked about it the next day and tried to come up with some sort of rational explanation for what they saw. They could not think of anything. Now, all these years later, he's telling me this story and we're both still trying to figure out what it could have been. I believe it was a Bigfoot. I don't think it was the same creature. When I explained to him what I saw, he explained the creature he saw was much different. It looked like your typical Patty Bigfoot, the kind of Bigfoot that's commonly depicted in all modern pop culture. What I saw was much more slender and reptilian looking, although the way it moved was very like a gorilla. We're not sure what we could have seen. Maybe, just maybe, this was something beyond our wildest dreams and comprehension. Or maybe this whole thing is merely a coincidence and I didn't see anything. I'll leave that up to you. I served in the United States Armed Forces during Operation Enduring Freedom. I have fought overseas and have gone through many battles. I know for a fact that I was prepared to do whatever it takes to defend myself and my country. I am a proud retired veteran of the U.S. Army, and I stand behind my words. Now, the Zion Narrows hike from the Chamberlain's Ranch is an amazing hike through a beautiful slot canyon with 2 large waterfalls at the end. But before we ever went camping, I did a lot of research about Zion National Park and never saw anything that would support the existence of Bigfoot. However, I found out later from other hikers in the area that there have been reports going back to at least the 1970s. We were staying one of the main trails running through the park, but our campsite was hidden away from view by some vegetation. That's why we had heard no sounds coming from nearby hikers or campers, and probably why we were able to sneak up on this thing undetected until it was less than 8 yards away. I should mention my wife is a very intelligent person, but she'd rather not be included in this story for her own safety. She still works for the Utah school system, and I'm worried that somebody might find out about what she saw. She also is not crazy about the fact that I'm speaking to you and writing this down. She's the type that wants to forget about this altogether, but you know how things are. Also, my camcorder battery died right before we saw it. But if I had known this was going to happen, I definitely would have kept it charged longer before heading out on our hike. This had all led up to our camping trip in Zion National Park back in May of last year, 2011. My wife and I had just finished up our second day's hike when we came upon this creature about 10 yards away from us, standing next to some downed trees along the creek. If it were human, it would have been 6 feet tall, but very slender, long arms that hung down to its knees, very pale bluish white coloring with an almost translucent quality to its skin. No hair at all on its body. The head was more rounded than pointed. The unusual part, though, was the eyes. The pupils were large and black, with almost a shimmering quality to them, almost metallic in appearance. And I knew this was not a human we were looking at. I can't remember if it was glowing or not, but at one point, it reached up to grab the branch of tree that was hanging right above its head, and I could see through the arm. Just before grabbing the branch, there was even some kind of silvery sheen along its outstretched arm, like an optical trick. Then it jumped to the branch, which was about 12 feet up. My wife said it had a surprised look on its face, and I could swear it got brighter for just a moment before she saw it. We were both just totally shocked by what we were seeing. It just stood there on the branch, looking at us. I remember thinking that if it wanted to, it could have easily come down, killing us both right then and there. I should also mention that just before we saw the creature, my wife and I were talking about how odd it was that we had not seen any wildlife at all during our hike. Like something was off and all nature knew. We had been hearing frogs and crickets up until that point, but they suddenly stopped. It was as if this creature had scared everything else away. Now, since that time, we've pretty much been confined to our home. We're both too afraid to go outside at night, and even during the day, we try to keep a close eye on our surroundings and the woods. I'm sure you can understand how this has affected our lives. The face was definitely not human. It had a very elongated chin and a pronounced brow ridge. The eyes were large and almond-shaped, with black pupils set against the shimmering silver irises. I remember thinking that it looked something out of a science fiction movie, something you would see on Stargate, or maybe Star Trek. As for this creature, it was maybe 6 feet tall and very slender. Like I said, long arms that hung down to its knees. The skin was a bluish-white color, looking almost albino or ghost-like, with a translucent quality. I saw no discernible ears or any hair on the body, and it definitely did not look human, although it did look humanoid. And I'll never forget how this thing moved. No wasted movements at all, almost gliding from one spot to another, smooth and deliberate in its actions. There was also a surprising gracefulness to its movements, like a professional dancer instead of a lumbering giant. This thing could have easily outrun me if it wanted. This happened to me when I was a child. While I have no real memory of it, my parents swear that it's true. The story dates back to when I was 4 years old. We lived in our old home in Idaho, and during that time, I had an imaginary friend. Well, I apparently had many, but I had grown, in the words of my parents, closer to one more than the others. The friend wasn't really a human, but more like the big bad wolf who wanted to eat the Little Red Riding Hood. I called him Jack. I talked about Jack all day to my parents, about how strong and tall he was, and how I wanted to grow up like him, but only played with him at night after everybody else had gone off to sleep. I played with him all throughout the night, and had a lot of difficulty getting up for school. Due to a lack of sleep, I ended up taking naps between lessons and grew very irritable. Naturally, it called for a few times out and regular scolding from my father, who threatened to take away my TV privileges if I failed to clean up my act. However, I did not listen. I continued to stay up late and got punished for it. My TV privileges were revoked, and I had been given a strict lights-out time for 7 p.m., which is criminally early. A few days after that, I had told my parents that Jack didn't like seeing me get punished, so he said that he wouldn't come for a while. Jack left, and so did my sleeping issues. My parents figured that it would have been a way for me telling me that I wouldn't play at night anymore, so they were happy. I could see TV again, so I was happy too. When I was 6, my father got a promotion, and we had to move to Ohio. On our moving day, most of our stuff, including the beds, had gone. All that remained were a few things in my room, which were supposed to go with us. That night, everybody slept in my room because we only had one king-sized mattress. Jack came back that night. Around 2 a.m., Dad was woken up by my laughter. I was talking to Jack. He got up to reprimand me, but then he saw Jack, outside the sliding glass door of my room, standing 9 feet tall, an ape-like creature with sharp claws and a wolfish face. It had bright red eyes and long, thick arms, and was literally standing on 2 feet. It was looking directly at me, moving its arms in a rhythmic, weird to and from fashion. My father screamed, which woke my mother up. She saw Jack and also screamed. Dad picked me up in one arm, held my mom's hand in the other, and ran to their old bedroom, where he used to keep his guns. I had started crying, saying that Jack was a friend, and they were being very rude. Dad locked us in the room, gone out with his shotgun, but he had returned for a few moments later, saying this creature was gone. It had not left any footprints, even though it should have considering its gigantic size. None of us could sleep that night, and throughout the night, my mother held me tightly and sobbed uncontrollably. We moved the next day, and I never really talked about Jack again. I was forbidden to play with him by my father, and instructed to wake them up if he ever came back. But he never did. Occasionally, I admitted missing him, but soon forgot about it. I still look back and wonder how I have virtually no memory of this ever happening. But then again, how many of us listening to this have memories back to when we were about 5 years old? Even myself are very faint. This happened to me when I was visiting my family in Massachusetts. Back in 2006, I guess. I'm not really sure of the year, but it was at least 15 years ago, so probably right around that time frame. I was at my grandmother's house near West Bridgewater. The neighborhood as my grandparents live in is pretty sparsely populated, and their backyard is quite literally forest. If you've ever stopped to look around while driving through North Elm Street, you know how thick the forest on either side of the street are. I never liked visiting their house. It's not that I did not love my grandparents, which I did very much, but the woods creeped me out, especially those woods. Throughout my childhood, I slept in their room in the attic, which had a huge window directly beside my bed, overlooking the woods. The trees by themselves were so thick, they could hide a lot of potential horrors going on in there. But sometimes I did see things that I believe should not have existed. On multiple occasions, I could see unexplained lights and hear sounds coming from the trees. I always ignored them though. One time, I had heard somebody knock on my window in the middle of the night. This made me cry in fear and wake up the entire house. We put a curtain on the window after that. Now, I had nearly gotten used to the constant state of fear that I lived in whenever we went there for vacations. But the incident I'm about to tell you stands out from all other experiences, because this time, it wasn't subtle or distant. It was a night like any other. We had dinner, watched TV, and I went to my room near 9 p.m. I was not able to sleep until very that night for some reason. I guess I was reading or doing some other activity I don't remember, when I heard a strange cough-like sound coming from outside. I felt dread more than I did fear, due to the sheer amount of paranormal crap that went on in there, and involuntarily glanced at the clock. It was a little past 2 a.m. I remember this fact, because somebody told me that you usually cannot tell the time from a clock in a dream. I obviously know it wasn't a dream, but this makes me sure. Anyway, despite the fear, I wanted to check outside for people or ghosts. Fear of the known is always better than fear of the unknown, at least for me. I moved the curtain to take a peek, but everything was black. I don't mean black like a moonless night, but black like a coating of paint. I could not see anything outside, and I wanted to open the window to clear my confusion, but I was too scared. The sound came again. It was kind of a short, low hum and a high pitch. I know that doesn't make much sense, but this is the best I can explain, and this is exactly how it sounded to my ears. I tried to ignore it, burying myself in my blanket. Then, there was a loud crashing noise, and then the sound of shattered glass. I had already been jumping due to the noise, and this made me fall out of my bed, onto some shards of broken glass. I cried in pain, looked at the window. The curtain was half outside, and all the glass in my window was gone. It wasn't all in my room, but about 95% of it was outside. It most always as if the glass had been broken by somebody on the inside, from my room. As I spun my head, and my back hurt from the impact, I rushed to the window with watering eyes and looked outside. There was nothing in the forest, but there was certainly something over it. It was a bird or a bat, or some similar creature with a wingspan of at least 30 to 40 feet, flying in the direction directly opposite to me, into the distance. My father came rushing right then into my room. He had been woken up by the noise. Pretty much everyone had been, but he came first. I pointed my finger out the window, and by the time he could see what I was referring to, the bird was barely visible. However, he did see it. I know that, because he believed my story. Well, I have no memory of the aftermath. I was given another room for the rest as well as our other stays, and nothing significant happened after that. Grandfather passed away in 2008. Grandma moved to Texas to stay closer to my uncle, so I never went there after that anyway. The obvious conclusion is that the creature had been sitting near the window and had its wings right in front of the window. When it decided to fly away, it created a vacuum and shattered the glass. That is obvious explanation, but it doesn't make it any less scary. The largest bat known today is a monstrosity, and it's only about a sixth of the creature I saw. It really changed my relationship with the state of Massachusetts altogether, and I avoid it as much as I can, even today. Okay, so I've never really believed in urban legends or cryptids or anything like that, really. I consider myself a pretty practical person, and I could say without embarrassment that imagination has never been my strong point, which is why I'm really overwhelmed by the encounter that I had one summer night about 4 years ago. Let me explain. I used to work a graveyard shift on the other side of town. One night, or maybe I should say morning, I was heading home on my usual route. I like to use a long road surrounded by lots of woodland. I drive through between 3 and 4 a.m. Besides deer and the occasional skunk, there's nothing really to worry about on that road. Or so I thought. Now, that night, I was admittedly way more tired than usual. My mother had been visiting, which threw my sleep schedule into disarray. I did manage to get a bit of time off, but I still had to work a couple of days. That particular night was my first back to work, after picking up my mother from the airport and running around town, spending time together and catching up. I was exhausted. Happy, but exhausted. Maybe I was nodding off a little, but I don't really think it was too severe. I had the radio on fairly high in an effort to keep myself awake. You have to stay alert to keep an eye out for deer, and I always watched the sides of the road and my mirrors. That's why I caught the odd flash of movement in my side view mirror. And I do mean odd. It was the briefest flash of what looked like something big and white. I was confused. I double glanced at the side view mirror and then checked my rear view mirror. I thought maybe it was another car that I had not noticed. But even as I was thinking this, I thought it a bit strange that I did not notice another car behind me sooner. And in fact, there was not another car. Feeling more confused, I was willing to dismiss it as a trick of the light, from my headlights or the moonlight or something. I kept driving, feeling a little weirded out, and then something hit the side of the car on the driver's side. Not a heavy hit, but enough to be heard. Like a big animal had bumped into the passenger side door behind my seat. Alarmed, I checked the side view mirror again, and again, I saw nothing. But by that point, I knew I was not imagining things. I don't imagine things. Twice is not a coincidence. It's already a pattern. So I was wide awake and pretty freaked out. You might wonder why I was so worked up if I'm not superstitious. Well, it's because I knew that the two incidents did not make sense with any logical explanations. It couldn't have been a deer. I was driving way too fast, and deer aren't all white either. So now, I'm sitting there, scanning my surroundings pretty hard, and I remember sitting up and leaning forward in my seat. That's when I caught another split-second glimpse of movement in the rearview mirror. And what I caught, sight, it made my heart leap up into my throat. Whatever it was flying. It had huge wings, as big or bigger than my car. The color of the thing was kind of ashy off-white, like a moth. That I remember pretty clearly. What gets a bit fuzzy, though, is the thing's face. The thing was visible for the briefest second in the rearview mirror before it disappeared. And I was so overwhelmed, I didn't really focus on any specific details of its appearance. But when I try to remember the face, I think of these two big black eyes and two long narrow ears. Honestly, I describe it as sort of a goblin-looking face. But those are the details I'm least certain about. I let out a scream and, yeah, I swerved a bit on the road in a knee-jerk reaction. But with that thing no longer visible, I pressed hard on the gas, speeding straight down the road. My eyes were wide and my heart thumping. I remember clenching the steering wheel so hard, my left hand was cramping. I wanted to lower the radio, which was loudly playing advertisements, so that I could listen for any noise. I could not bring myself to let go of the steering wheel, like it was waiting for me to take a hand off the wheel so it could strike. Obviously, the number of hands on the wheel had little impact on the thing's ability to attack. But at that point, logic abandoned me. For the rest of the drive down that road, I went well over the speed limit. My body frozen stiff, but my eyes kept wildly darting between the mirrors and the road in front of me. I was waiting for something, anything, but nothing happened. It was just gone. And before I knew it, I was pulling into the residential streets. Only then did I find and finally slow down. I felt marginally safer with the houses lining the streets instead of trees. Even when I got home, I parked in the garage instead of the street, and I half expected that thing to swoop down. It never reappeared. Everybody always says that I probably nodded off and had a lucid nightmare or something. And I get that. Believe me, I get it. I would have said the same. Would have dismissed it as somebody's tired brain playing tricks on them. But I want to remind you that my brain has never been creative enough to play tricks on me, no matter how exhausted or panicked. I'm the last person to imagine such a thing, and I discovered on the internet that maybe others have experienced similar things like I did. The closest matching description I could think of is the Mothman. So, I'm here to share an encounter with a creature that most of you probably know. It's called the Skinwalker. Now, I personally love paranormal stuff, especially things that have to do with ghosts or spirits. Just the thought of roaming the world after you die, or haunting a certain place because of a grudge, really just tickles my imaginations. This encounter happened when I was 17. I lived in Utica, a small town in Illinois, with my mother and her boyfriend at the time. I would eventually move to Alaska to live with my father and his new family when I turned 20. Anyway, one day, I went to a friend's house and found out that there was a sighting of a ghost in an abandoned house just outside of their subdivision. I love paranormal stuffs, right? So I couldn't help but see for myself. After a lot of failed attempts at convincing him, I finally managed to wear him down and agreed to explore this abandoned house with me. We scheduled it and planned to go there the following day. It was Saturday, the next day. We went to check the place at around 4 p.m. and planned to explore at until around 6, or just before nightfall, since he had to get back before it became dark. The house was in a secluded area, surrounded by thick trees, and it was quite far, like 40 minutes if we walked, but we got there in like 12, because we rode on a motorbike, just me and my friend. The road was bumpy. It was a dirt path, and we were getting close. I could see the house. There was a dilapidated wall covering the house. It wasn't that tall, just about 6 feet. You can definitely climb it with some effort. There was also a broken down gate at the front and a tree beside it. As we got closer, I could feel this adrenaline coursing in my body like I was hyper. I wanted to explore the house immediately and maybe encounter something supernatural. At that time, that was what I was hoping for, but we didn't even make it past the gate when something supernatural happened. The tree outside the gate suddenly rustled. Not just a single branch, but the whole tree was shaking. My friend immediately stopped his bike as we watched in shock. I could not explain the feeling. It's like my body wanted to move, but could not. We were stunned, to be honest. Then we heard this hooting sound like that of an owl, but deeper and huskier. It woke us up. We were hearing it. My friend immediately tried to turn his bike around, but lost his balance, tumbled, and fell from the bike. We panicked, turned around, jumped, and swerved to the side as we hurriedly rode back. I looked back and saw a long grayish feet dropping from the tree, and then a humanoid thing appeared. It was hanging there with one hand like a monkey, and then it appeared naked and also hunchback. It produced this strange noise we had heard earlier before running after us in a very unnatural crawling motion. I watched it all with the heart pounding out of my chest. It was quite fast, and I honestly thought it would chase us until it got to us. But it stopped midway, just stared before it turned back. My friend and I spoke about the encounter and never went back again. We also have researched it, and we have come to the conclusion that it was a Skinwalker. We don't know why it behaved like that, or if it was trying to eat us or kill us or being territorial. This is only an assumption. I've read a few encounters with a Skinwalker and observed various different behaviors. One thing they have in common, though, is they will attack if they get the chance, or hex you if they can. For the past few nights, I would always hear these flaps of wings right outside my apartment house. It would appear right around 1 in the morning and would come and go. I live near Cheat Lake in West Virginia. I just moved in a few months ago. I love the place, I do, and the people. I also got a job here, which is why I moved here in the first place. Anyway, everything was going great when a few weeks ago, I suddenly started hearing flaps of wings outside. At first, I heard it when it was my day off and I was staying up late. I thought it might be nocturnal birds, but the sound was quite loud, to be honest. It immediately disappeared as fast as it had appeared, so I forgot the incident the very next day. But when I had heard the sound again, I looked out the window, didn't see anything. The next day, I waited for it to appear, and I was ready. I heard the sound, went outside. I came out the back door and looked up, but didn't see anything. It puzzled me then because where could it be coming from? I didn't manage to find it at the end because it disappeared immediately. The very next day at morning, I walked around the house and looked for something that could have made the noise. When I didn't find anything, I went upstairs, climbed out the window, and went up to my roof. Then, I saw it there were footprints up on the roof, human-like footprints. There were mud tracks on the flat surface of my roof. I couldn't see it before when I was on the ground, but now I know this is where the real culprit would hang out. I waited the next night, till about 1 a.m., and when I heard the sound, I ran outside, shining my light on the roof when I saw it. It was a humanoid creature, with glowing big red eyes and 4 arms. It was covered in fur, and its back, there were these fleshy wings like that of a bat. When my light shone on it, it snarled at me and crouched down. I ran like hell inside my house, locking everything, barricading the doors with some shelves. I hid in my bathroom, and I heard the flaps of wings soon after. I assumed that thing had leapt, but I did not take any chances and stayed inside my bathroom until I fell asleep, waking up once every few minutes, looking at the door with a pounding heart. I honestly thought that thing would come back the very next day, so I invited a few friends over, told them what I saw, but the thing never came back again. The snow had covered everything, and you can kind of see far away, even though the sky was cloudy. There was nobody outside, and the smoke was coming out of every chimney in the neighborhood. Christmas spirit had already fully settled in. The locals had put in a lot of effort this year to make every corner of our little cul-de-sac as vibrant and inviting as possible. It was my whole family's favorite time of year. My whole family had gathered in our childhood home. My brother and sister flew back home from college for the break. We were spending Christmas and New Year's Eve together. All 5 of us, our parents and us. We made dinner together that night. It was something special, spending the day together, which we hadn't and had the chance to do in a long time. Everybody was ready to go to bed, and I realized that I forgot my phone charger in the car. It was around midnight. I had walked out of the house and onto the driveway to get my phone charger from my car. It was freezing out, but it was also very calming. I walked out in slippers and without a jacket, so I tried to get back inside as fast as I could. When I approached the car, I was close enough to the street that I could clearly see strangely shaped prints on the snow-covered pavement. It had been snowing for a bit that night, and there were not as many people out, and so the snow-covered prints were there. This got me curious, so I grabbed my charger, heading back inside. I decided to inspect the strange prints outside. I wasn't very sleepy. I put my jacket and boots on, walking back outside. The prints were indeed there. For a moment, I thought I might have imagined them, but no. They were real and very big. They were shaped exactly like bird footprints, but they were far too big to be any bird that lived in these parts. These prints were much bigger than my hand when I stretched my fingers out wide. Initially, I thought that was maybe one of the neighbor's kids who still had their Halloween costume and insisted on wearing it out. However, this didn't make sense. It did not look like somebody had walked down the street in bird feet-shaped shoes. It was a pair of prints pointing towards our house, like somebody who was standing there and facing our house, and no other prints anywhere around it. I knew I wouldn't be able to see any prints on the road, but I saw that the pavement on the other side of the road had no prints whatsoever. I stood there for about a good 3 minutes or so, waiting if I would see or hear anything, but there was nothing. It was dead silent. I decided that it must have been neighbors' kids. They loved pulling pranks on everybody in our street, and that was it. As I turned back to walk in the house, I heard something that sounded like the flapping of wings, but it was loud, or at least it sounded to me like it was much louder than it was in the night, so quiet and still. I looked around, up towards the rooftops when I saw it, and I knew the prints belonged to that thing because it was big. I haven't been able to take a look at its head because the wings were covering it. It was on the top of my neighbor's roof, and from my perspective, all I could see were legs and wings. It looked like a 5-foot-tall bat. except its legs looked far more human-like and were pretty long and muscular. And my first thought was that it might have been one of the stupid kids pulling a stunt. A very dangerous one, mind you. This thing quickly convinced me that I should be scared for myself, and not anyone else, because it turned towards me and growled. I could not force myself to say anything or to move. I felt like the snow around me had started to freeze. I have no idea what was there, or how to describe its face. Its head wasn't very big, and it was up, on that roof, so I could see it clearly. I think it was intelligent enough to know that it was not a good place to attack me, because other people were in close enough proximity they would probably come out to help me. All I know is that it was not happy that I saw it. It jumped off the roof and flew away. I was still in shock as I stared at this human bat bird-looking thing that spread its 6-foot wide wings, disappearing into the black night. Out of my view, after it was gone, I went back into my house, nearly stumbling a few times. I could not keep my eyes on the driveway and was constantly looking around me. I was so scared that it would come back. I didn't know what to do next, so I went to bed and spent the whole night researching the web in hopes of finding out anything or if anybody has seen anything similar. This happened some 5 years ago. I was fortunate enough to never see it personally again, but ever since, I've been obsessed with reading stories like this. I became obsessed with learning about other people's encounters and experiences when it comes to animals or mutants, which are not publicly confirmed. I used to be a skeptic until about 5 years ago. I shared this story with my family the morning that it happened. My mother and siblings did not believe me, and I still think they don't. But my father did. He never told me about his experiences before, but he shared them with me after that day. I will share them with you in the future if you are interested. I have had this irrational fear of the dark ever since I was a little boy. There is something that makes me feel uneasy when I am unable to see around me. My mind gets creative and I imagine all sorts of horrible things that could happen. I'm not a kid anymore, but that fear stuck with me. Only one person knows about that, and that is my best friend. That fear is the main reason I avoid staying alone in the house and activities, such as a midnight strolls or camping. Every time my friends or family plan something like that, I make up this excuse not to show up. I never joined them until this last summer, when one of my other closer friends just celebrated his 21st. His idea was to celebrate it over the night, camping outdoors in the forest, and since 21sts are pretty big deals, I simply could not avoid it. For the whole week before the trip, I felt anxious, daydreaming about how awful it's going to be. But none of my thoughts even came close to being as terrifying as to what actually happened that night. The Judgment Day arrived, and 5 of us were packed up in a car, making our way to the nearest forest, somewhere in the afternoon. As I said, it was summer, and the sun was still very high and the weather was extremely hot and dry. My only consolation was that the nights are extremely short during that period. I wouldn't have to be in the dark for a long time. We arrived at our destination, parked the car, and kept going on foot into the forest. I thought we would just take the nearest clearest spot to set up camp. But Birthday Boy had another idea. He made us walk over an hour before we finally settled where we were so deep in the forest, none of us knew the way back. It would be more fun like this, he said. The forest got thicker and thicker the further we walked. We had very little difficult time finding a spot with no branches over our heads to place the tents. When we finally did settle, the first few hours went by quickly, and I even felt a bit more relaxed. We were drinking, playing games, and I genuinely enjoyed the day. The sun was slowly setting, and we began working on the campfire. To keep the area lit and to chase away pesky insects, I had a few more beers than I should have, and felt a little tipsy at this point. I had to use the bathroom. I walked behind the nearest tree, and went just a little further so I could be sure that none of my friends will try to do some stupid prank on me. With each step forward that I took, the darkness became bigger and bigger until it swallowed me whole. I tried to finish my business as soon as possible and head back. But when I turned around, I could not see anything or hear my friends. I found myself in pitch black darkness, and it felt like I was in the void. That feeling alone was already enough to make me feel paranoid. I tried to make my way back, but I had no idea in which direction I was going. After a couple of moments of what felt like walking around in circles, I caught a glimpse of light in the distance. For a second, I felt relieved and calmed down a bit. That feeling did not last long. As I came close to the fire, I slowly realized that what I'm looking at is not the campfire that was made. I was walking toward a huge bonfire that was even taller than I. As soon as I noticed this, I froze in place, unable to believe my own two eyes. I noticed something white inside and around the fire that was definitely not wood. Quickly realizing, I'm looking at a pile of bones. Human bones, to be precise. I was so terrified I nearly fainted on the spot. My body simply wasn't able to function. I could not move or run. I stood there, staring at the fire and the bones. And then I saw shadows emerging from the trees on the opposite side of the bonfire. It was walking slowly and silently, closer and closer to the fire and me. When it got close enough to the fire, the light from the fire lit up its face and body, and I could see the thing perfectly. It looked like a man with a black hood, but his face looked awful and completely disfigured. He wore many scars and stitches on his skin, and his left eye was missing. It felt horrible just to look at him. He was over 7 feet tall, with long, slender arms, and he was holding something in his hands. It was a human leg. I almost vomited when I saw the blood dripping down the toes. The man was holding a leg that looked like it was torn off from a body near the knee, and it looked fresh, as in it happened very recently. He brought the leg close to the face and smelt it with anticipation. He opened his mouth and revealed these huge, sharp teeth. They did not look human at all. His jaw and teeth were more similar to that of a jaguar. His teeth sunk into the bloody human leg, and the sound of him tearing and chewing the flesh made me even more sick. I finally found the courage to move. I slowly backed up into the deep, dark forest, step by step, making sure I don't make a sound. When I felt like I was far enough, I turned around, started going as fast as possible. I had no idea if I was walking towards our camp or not, but the only thing I cared about was getting away as farther away from there as possible. After what felt like an eternity of walking behind the trees, I see a tiny light in the darkness. This time, it was our campfire. I finally felt safe again. All of my friends were asleep, probably passed out from the alcohol, so I woke up my best friend, got him to keep me company until dawn. I couldn't wake them all up and make them leave. They would have never believed my story, so I had no other choice but to wait for morning time. Luckily, my best friend knew how I feel, so he did not mind sitting with me in the darkness. After that day, I'm definitely never going camping again. Before I share this story, I want to make something very, very clear. I'm a pretty big guy. I work out 5 times a week, and I pay a lot of attention to my physique. I'm also pretty fast, even despite my size. I don't get scared easily and feel like physically I have the upper hand in most situations. I think it's important that you all know this, just so you can understand what happened a little bit better. I'm also Swedish, born and raised here. I've left the country for a couple of days at most, but I mostly travel around Sweden, and I feel like after all these years, I still have not discovered every part of it. I love Sweden. The people are nice, and the living conditions are great. It also has a lot to offer, and a lot of beautiful nature. And maybe, to your surprise, I actually really enjoy the climate here. I'll choose the cold over a warm climate always. I go hiking and camping pretty frequently, and I always leave my phone behind, and I always go by myself. It might sound incredibly stupid, yeah, but it has been a way for me to challenge myself. I barely use my phone anyway, so I've never had an issue for me to live without it. All I take with me is camping gear, food, and a map. And my car, of course. I try not to go to too many places, at least the same places. I'd rather discover something new. I'm 22, by the way, still living with my parents. I'm trying to finish my university degree. My mother never liked me going places by myself, not without a way to contact anybody in case of an emergency. But I just didn't listen to her. Something I would regret when I went camping the last time. The last time I went camping was in April last year. It was perfect weather for me at the time. So, I decided to go away for about 4 days. Alone again, of course. I was really looking forward to that camping trip. It had been a while since I went out on that one before, mostly because of schoolwork. It took me a couple of hours to get to the camping grounds, but I managed to do so in the late afternoon, before it got dark. This allowed me to put up my tent. There was only ever one other vehicle when I had arrived, a small van. It appeared as if they were getting ready to leave, an elderly couple. I parked my car far away from them, and giving them some privacy. I could not see the van from where I was parked, so I couldn't know whether or not they had left. At the time, I just assumed they did, and to be honest, I really didn't care. I was not planning on staying close to them anyway, and the first night was very pleasant. It was quiet. The temperature was just right, and I fell asleep, reading a book. I brought my watch, just to get some sense of time. I had been sleeping for a long time. It was noon when I had awakened. It didn't really matter, as I wasn't planning on following a schedule or anything. I was just as surprised as I had a lot of trouble sleeping. When I woke up, I noticed my tent was open. Well, that was kind of weird. But I figured I'd left it open anyway the night before. I was too tired to remember, though. I decided then to go for a long hike that day, deep into the forest. I brought everything I needed with me, including my compass and map. I never had any issues navigating through the forest. I had done it plenty of times, like my dad taught me. I had already been walking for hours when I decided to take a break and eat my lunch. That's all I did. Sit in silence and eat. It was the best part of these trips. Really just taking everything in and feeling all the stress leave my body. I did some exercise and this kind of made me feel better, and I resumed my hike. This is when it started. I felt like I was being watched. I just had this eerie feeling that I was not alone anymore. So, I called out for whomever was there with me. Nobody answered. As I mentioned before, I do not get scared easily, but I felt very uncomfortable. I decided to just ignore it, convincing myself that whoever was there, I would be able to handle it if there was a confrontation. I could not shake the feeling for the rest of the hike. When I got back to the camping site, I felt some sort of relief. The feeling that somebody was following me did not go away, though. I wasn't tired at all. I was in fact very alert, very aware of my surroundings. I did know that if I wanted to go hiking again the next day, I had to get some rest. I got into my tent, made sure to close it that time. I got into my sleeping bag and just looked up at the top of my tent. I could see the moon and the stars through the thin fabric, and staring at those, I was beginning to fall asleep. But then it hit me. It was an awful feeling. I was scared, and I heard a loud male voice right next to my tent. This person was super close to me. My body completely tensed up, and I could not move at all. I could barely breathe. I didn't even hear what he said, but I did hear a woman's voice coming from in front of my tent, in front of the opening where my feet were. She said, "I think so." She was whispering. I heard the woman opening the zipper of the tent, and I don't think I've ever closed my eyes as hard as I was doing right then and there. I expected to feel somebody grabbing my feet or my legs, but there was nothing. After a couple of minutes, I opened my eyes slightly, but they completely shot open when I was looking straight into the woman's eyes. I could see that she was panicked as well. She just got up, turned around, and said, "Go, go." I then heard both of them run off fast. I was still frozen in fear and did not have the courage to run after them. I left that night. Their van wasn't there when I drove by. I have not gone camping since, and I'll never do it again. Not without my phone. Two weeks ago, my brother and I experienced something that traumatized the both of us. We're not really fond of the horror genre and things that are related to it. We have faint of hearts and get scared very easily. So just recalling this story is already making me paranoid, but I want to share it, get it out of my system. Also, I believe we're not the only ones who experienced this. 2 weeks ago, me and my brother went to Misamis Oriental in the Philippines. We traveled from Cebu City to this province to visit some relatives. Initially, we did not want to go, since we had other plans. See, I was supposed to go on a trip with my friends and my brother, and he wanted to spend his whole summer playing video games. Our parents kind of forced us to go because my uncle's birthday was near, and our parents wouldn't be able to attend the celebration because they're busy with work, so they made us go instead. We have relatives who live near Mount Balatucan, and it's not just my uncle, it's a bunch of them. It's been years since we last visited. Most of the time, they would be the one to visit us here, so there was no need for us to go, but this time, since it was summer, and we have no class and our uncle had been bedridden for 3 years, so he can't travel anymore. It just so happens to be the perfect opportunity for us to visit. The trip was long. The weather was hot, so it wasn't a pleasant trip. Just going there and imagining the trip back home made it more unbearable. We got there right. Our relatives were excited and jolly, so it was a nice welcome. They were full of smiles and very accommodating. It was nice, but something felt off, like something was wrong. There were other people living in the area, so we passed by quite a few houses. It wasn't just me. My brother also felt it. The atmosphere in that place was kind of off. Like the people who lived near our relatives were acting weird. The way they stared at us was creepy to say the least. Especially the elders. They had this look that doesn't seem to welcome us. I asked around and the answer I got just made it weirder. It turns out, somebody died in the village, and the people believe that it's the case of somebody using black magic. Even my aunt, who was the wife of my bedridden uncle, believed my uncle was cursed by somebody. Well, 2 days passed since, and nothing really interesting had happened. We mostly stayed inside the house, feeling homesick, and made to listen to creepy village stories told by my aunt. She was a firm believer of curses and blessings, and all the other paranormal junk. It was kind of creepy, though, how she kept talking about those things, even after we told her we don't like it. Anyway, my uncle's birthday is just the next day, and after that, we're going home. So our relatives got this idea of touring us around. Our cousins took us to swim at a lagoon. We arrived at a forest at the mountain's foot. It took about an hour of walking to get there, and we went quite deep into the forest to get to the lagoon. It was a rather small lagoon, clear water, so the swimming was fun. After we ate lunch, me, my brother, and one of my cousins explored the area. There were no wild animals, and my cousins were familiar with the place, so it was at very least safe. After walking around for a while, my brother and me felt goosebumps. It was definitely weird since it happened to the both of us at the same time. Our cousin was not affected, though we thought maybe it was just cool, since the air was quiet and wet from swimming. We continued, and eventually got further and further away from the lagoon. After a while of walking, we spotted a weird tree. It was standing out from the rest. We went to go get a closer look and saw an old tree. It was crooked, looked darker than the rest, and it had no leaves. And beside it, on the ground, there was a pentagram. 2 pentagrams, one small on the left and a bigger on the right. There were also candles, black candles, that seemed to have been used recently. There were rocks in different shapes and sizes placed around it, as if placed in order and organized. Also, there was nothing on the small one, but on the big one looked to be an animal skull, perhaps a dog or pig skull. I didn't get much of a good look. My cousin immediately dragged us back to the lagoon. After seeing this, my skin was crawling. I remember what my aunt told us about curses and black magic, so we hurried back. I noticed that my brother kept looking back. I thought that maybe he was so scared, so I grabbed his wrist, let him in, but then he screamed, grabbed onto me. I asked him what's wrong, but he just looked back at the tree as he screamed and he saw something following us. I instinctively looked and didn't see anything, but as I turned my head to look at my brother, just for a split second, I swear, I saw something black and big moving right beyond the corner of my eyesight. I immediately looked for it, but I didn't see anything. I did not get a good look at it, but I know what I saw. I might have just been paranoid at the time and was not thinking straight, but my brother told me what he saw, and it matched with the thing that I got a glimpse of. I didn't think anything anymore and dragged my brother back to the lagoon. We explained what we saw, and my other cousin immediately packed up. For a second, I thought they wouldn't believe us and would see for themselves if we're telling the truth, but immediately they believed us. We arrived back in my uncle's house and told my auntie about the encounter. She packed our stuff and sent us off the very next day. Before leaving, my cousin, who went with us, told us that the tree we found was burned and the lagoon area was restricted. My cousin kept saying how lucky we are to go back to being safe. It turned out my uncle found something similar a few years ago, and that's how he became bedridden. Both my grandparents loved exploring mountains and forests. They would travel long distances with their backpacks. Eventually, they settled somewhere into the woods. Buying a small parcel of land with forest behind it, they built a house. And now, 45 years later, my grandfather is no more. Grandmother lives alone in the big house. One summer, 10 years back, my sister, mother, and I visited Grandma to take her home because she was so sick. She refused, saying that she could not live anywhere leaving this house, as it was built both by her and her husband. One night, when Grandma's health deteriorated, my father and mother both took her to the nearest hospital. My sister and I were all alone in the house that night, so we decided to play games while the night went by, and sleeping in the morning because it was a little too scary to sleep in such a big house alone, just the two of us. We were playing tag-along where one caught the other. I ran to Grandma's room, hiding under the bed, heard somebody running as the footsteps approached from the front. I slid back again, not to let her see me, and that is when she poked me from behind, screaming she found me. I wondered for a second when she ran past the bed when I could hear her running ahead. Shaking such thoughts, we continued playing till it was around 5 in the morning. Grandmother's room was beautiful, a big king-sized bed made of wood and beautiful carving by craftsmen, none other than our grandpa. The giant chandelier on the ceiling, the old radio, the flute, the sit-back chair, a photo frame above the bed of both my grandparents smiling brightly. We sat on the floor, watching all of these and remembering old memories. When I looked at the photograph above the mattress, Grandpa's eyes looked like they were saying something to me. It was an intense stare. Both of us slept in that very room as the sunlight hit the room directly, and we were not scared anymore. I went to the kitchen to get some boiled water. I heard a faint tune of a flute. It should be my sister, I thought. But when I went inside the room, she was asleep. I wondered who was playing the instrument. I thought I was tired and sleepy, so that is why I heard things. After a while, I went to sleep beside my sister. It was a big slap on my shoulder that woke me up. My sister was yelling at me for playing the flute, pranks, and not letting her sleep. Sudden sleep breaks made me dizzy, and it took me a couple of seconds to realize what she was saying. She told me about hearing a flute tune that woke her up, and when she was in the bathroom, somebody thudded the door and ran away. It was bizarre. I just woke up and nobody was in the house, so I told her about the flute that I heard a couple of hours ago, which sounded weird to her. We slept in our room. That's when a car pulled in our garage, and they were our parents. I went downstairs. Grandma was hospitalized, told my father. I started explaining things happening in the house. He told us not to play games and sleep when nighttime comes. He did not believe us. As we're putting things inside, my sister screamed from our room. We rushed to her and found her sitting in the corner of the room with a blanket on her folded knees and messy hair, tears rolling down her face and shivering out of fear. She had seen something. No, she had encountered something. Even though they were out in the middle of the woods, in complete solitude and peace and safety, there was something evil living just around their house that went inside and out, and more importantly, it wanted her. It already took my grandfather, and my grandmother was next. What were we going to do to save ourselves? I'm a fairly reliable person and have no real reason to make this up. I was also sober when I saw this. In the summer of 2015, friends and I were out in the middle of nowhere in Missouri, looking for ghosts. We had been looking for a place to do an EVP session, and had finally found the perfect spot. It was a little used gravel road that turned off into another little used gravel road, hidden by thicker trees. There was even an older house on the other side of the forest border. We parked in front of this abandoned house next to the tree line, facing west toward a large field. This was right around 9:40 p.m. We gathered around a fire that we had built. We were there for about an hour, telling ghost stories and trying to make something happen. Finally, it was probably closer to about 11 p.m., we turned off all the lights in the car and sat staring in the field with night vision goggles that my friend was borrowing from work. After maybe about another hour, everybody at this point was pretty lax. We were talking and joking around. I happened to be looking right out of the car, towards the tree line, when I see this large black figure that swooped down from the trees and fly over the field. It was huge and had large bat-like wings, much larger than any bat I'd ever seen. The wingspan alone had to have at least been 10 feet. I remember all of us seeing it, screaming. We weren't sure what to do. We floored the car and drove away. I don't think any of us slept at all that night. We pulled away about 10 minutes down the road, got out and tried to ascertain what we saw. None of us could believe what we had just seen. I put it out of my mind for about a week or so, until I started seeing articles online about giant bats attacking people here in Missouri. I can't remember which article it was now. It might have been one of the articles that author John Keel wrote, but there were several human victims who claimed to have been attacked by giant bats in the 80s and early 90s. These people all described wings that were 5 to 10 feet wide. We also had with us a Ouija board that we were planning to use in conjunction with an EVP to see if we could connect to any spirits. We never did end up using it, but I almost wonder if that board is the reason we saw what we did. I wonder if we had somehow summoned that bat thing, or maybe it was just curious about us. I can't help but think that it might have been a demonic entity. Has anybody out there seen anything remotely like what we did? Anything similar? I know winged and flying humanoids are a thing, but I just can't help but think that they're all demonic. When I was young, My grandmother always scared me with stories of El Chupacabra. We're originally from Puerto Rico, moved here to Missouri when I was very little, so pretty much everybody has heard of them. I was never really that scared of it because I knew in my deep subconscious it could not be real. According to my grandmother, it's a creature the size of a bear with spines down its back, as well as large fangs. It came after little kids who played outside for too long or did not listen to their elders. At least, that's what my G-Ma told me. Even though I didn't believe it, every time I was late home or I talked back to my grandma, I would get that fear in my bones from the Chupacabra hurting me or something. I remember this distinctly. So, on my 11th birthday, my parents were both working, so my grandma baked me a cake. I had some friends over at her house so I could have a party, but she was still able to look after us. The party was really nice and everybody had a good time. That night, I went to sleep later than usual, with good reasons obviously, because some of the kids left really late. I always slept with the door closed at my grandma's place, so that night, I closed it as well. Just as I was falling asleep, I heard something at the window. It was like tree branches were hitting it, being moved by the wind. I didn't pay that much attention to it and just ignored it. The second time, something hit my window really hard and I figured I had to check it out at what was going on outside. I wish I had not gone to the window, because when I did, I saw something that left me terrified for the rest of my life. Across the street from my grandma's house, there were some bushes. When I looked, they were shaking and it seemed like somebody was hiding behind them or something. And just as I was about to turn around and go to sleep, it came out. It was a huge creature that looked exactly like the stories my grandmother told me about, of the Chupacabra. I screamed, ran to my grandparents' room to tell them what I saw, and get them to scare the monster away. I was just a kid, so I really believed that my grandmother thought the Chupacabra existed, and when she told me it wasn't real, I tried to convince her with all my power that it was. When they came to my window to see what I was talking about, this thing was gone. They did not believe me, no matter how hard I tried to convince them, and now I understand them. I would not believe a kid with something like that either. Kids have a great imagination, but I can only wish I had imagined it. I did not want to sleep at my grandma's anymore. I was afraid I would see it again. 2 weeks had passed since this happened, and only one day I was walking home alone from my school since my parents were both working and could not pick me up. It was getting dark, and even though I had kind of forgotten about what had happened, I was still a little scared to be walking alone, and for good reason, apparently. Just as I was supposed to pass the nearby park, I heard something from behind. There were strange noises and loud footsteps. I was afraid to turn around and speed up, so I would get further away from it. But it sped up with me and kept following. I started running as my house was just around the corner, but it started running too. Somehow, I made it into my house. I locked the door as soon as I got in. I did not even notice when I lost it or even what it was. At no point did I have the courage to turn around, and maybe it's better that I didn't. I probably wouldn't be able to handle what happened later. We were on a school trip to the nearby lake. It was like a one-day field trip type of thing, and all my friends were going. I didn't know how or why, but I kept forgetting about the scary things that were happening to me. It was probably because I was a kid and didn't take it seriously. If all this happened now, I wouldn't even know how to act. So, the field trip was mostly spending time in the bus, and when we got there, we all got lunch boxes and an hour to explore the area around the lake. But there was no going into the forest or far away, where the teachers could not see us. My friends and I played tag, and we got caught up in that. We didn't even notice we were in the woods. As I realized it, fear had come over me, and I got paralyzed. When suddenly, we had heard the teacher calling for us and approaching the woods, so everybody quickly ran out of the woods. As I was running, I noticed a butterfly. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I tried to catch it, but I couldn't get to it because it was too fast. My friend Damien called out to me as he was exiting the woods. I yelled that I would be right out. I slowed my steps. The danger was gone, as the teacher saw we were all okay. At that exact moment, a branch had broke from behind me, and as a reflex, I turned around. I saw what I saw from my grandma's window that night. That's all I remember before waking up in the hospital. I fainted. They found me at the entry of the forest by the tree line. They had asked me what had happened and why I was lying on the ground unconscious. I told them. They did not believe me. Some kids even made fun of me at school because of what I said. All I know is that I'm now 30, but I still know that somewhere out there, a Chupacabra is probably waiting to hurt me. I have a scientific background. I'm reasonably intelligent and rational. I try not to be gullible. I'm not a nut, and I don't have a wild imagination. However, this experience alone was so unusual. I don't know what to make of it. Two people, my wife and I, were driving down on a rural highway near St. Louis in the early evening hours of August 10th, 2002, when we both saw a large owl-like creature perched on a utility pole about 60 yards ahead of us. The creature was completely white, about the size of a large bird, with a 6-foot wingspan. It had a round head and large eyes. My wife mentioned it, how odd it looked, and the fact that it was perched strangely. The closer we got, we could just see how frightening it looked and how strange it looked. We were both startled, and my wife even screamed. The creature flew off into the night sky, and we drove onward to our destination, discussing what we had just seen. We both agreed that it wasn't a bird. It wasn't an ordinary person either. It was definitely something other. We get to our destination about 10 minutes later, talking about the creature. My wife said she wanted to turn around and go back so she could show me the exact spot where the creature had perched on the pole. I agreed. We turned around. We drove back the way we had come and couldn't find the creature or the utility pole. We were both very shaken up by what we had just seen. Now, I'll try my best to give the best description of the creature from memory. White feathers, sort of glimmering white. Big round head with large eyes that seemed to glow from within. A round body with a lanky torso, and 2 legs with what appeared to be webbed feet. I did not notice arms, but it was dark, so I could have missed them if they were tucked close to the body. Wings that didn't flap in flight. Rather, they seemed to be more gliding or floating. At the moment of the initial sighting, my wife said it reminded her of an owl, but I didn't see that resemblance because I wasn't expecting to fly off when we approached. If I'd seen it perched, I may have described it as an owl. The wings were something closer to 6 feet. The eyes also seemed strange, and to have this glow like an inner light. It was very strange. Even now I think back to this creature, I get a chill. I'm not the type to believe in anything paranormal, but this was very, very strange for both of us. I come from Nevada, for those who don't know what that means. The state is huge, but there isn't anything really special to see here. Most of the land is barren, and there aren't many trees, only bushes and the occasional grassland. I've now since moved to Missouri, where I've had a host of strange, terrifying things happen, but before I get to that, let me tell you that Nevada is hell on earth in the summer. Very few shades and dry heat, and I can't stand the sun. Living here during summer makes me feel like somebody stuck me in an oven, leaving me to die. There are lots of great places for camping though, and sometimes I and a few friends would pack up our gear and pitch a tent for the night. We would only spend one night outside and pack up before dawn because, as I said, the heat can be too much to handle. Now, after moving to Missouri, I stuck with those same friends. We planned to spend more than one night. We packed up everything we could think of and tried to look for the shadiest, coolest place possible to make our camp. We set up our camping spot far away from any civilization. This way, nobody could ever bother us and kept our rides close by. This way we can cool off in the car tomorrow. About halfway through the night, one of my friends and I decided to go for a hike around the area. Now, it was a full moon, and since there weren't many trees, everything was pretty well lit. We walked in circles for about an hour, talking about life and whatnot, when suddenly we heard a cry in the distance. It sounded like a person pleading for their life. It was coming behind just a small hill just ahead of us. We couldn't really make out what the person was saying, but somebody was definitely in trouble. We knew that running to a random sound in the middle of the night wasn't exactly the smartest idea. So, we started slowly sneaking towards the place the sound had come from. We made it to the top of a small hill, but there was no signs of anybody. We were certain that we did not imagine the sound, but did not want to push our luck. We turned around to head back. Just then, we heard something yet again. This time, we could hear almost somebody trying to scream for help, but the sound was muffled, like somebody was holding a hand over the person's mouth. This time, the sound wasn't too far from us, and we could see the bushes from where it was coming from. Keep in mind that these aren't the bushes like you have in your backyard. They are over 4 feet tall, and can scratch you pretty good if you run through them. We sneaked close to the bushes to try and figure out what was going on, but the plea for help stopped. The next thing we heard made both of us freeze in place and freak out. The call for help suddenly turned into maniacal laughter. At first it was quiet, but it grew louder and more intense. The worst part is, it did not sound like a human. It resembled a hyena's laughter, which I've only heard on TV. We took a few steps back from the bushes, and before we could make a run for it, some weird-looking creature poked its head out of the bushes. It was a little smaller than a donkey, and it had a body that looked like somebody mixed a German shepherd with a hyena, but its fur had a strange red pattern on it. If that wasn't terrifying enough, its teeth looked like they all could not fit inside its mouth. The fangs were long and sharp, and they were sticking out, even when the creature's mouth was closed. We slowly walked backward, and the creature emerged from the bushes. Its appearance became even weirder after we could see its legs. You would expect an animal like this to have paws and sharp claws, but instead, we could see hooves, strong like ram hooves. While walking out, the creature was laughing uncontrollably, and that sound made us even more terrified. Somehow, we both knew that we could not outrun this thing, and we started screaming for help, hoping that at least our other friends could hear us. The creature did not seem to like this. It stopped laughing and grinned its mouth at us. The laughter seemed to slowly fade into a growl, like the same one a rabid dog would make. In a split second, this thing charged at us, galloping like a racehorse, sinking its teeth in my shorts. Luckily, it didn't touch my flesh, but it grabbed hold of my clothes strong enough to pull me down with a flick of its head. It made a sound that sounded like a mix of growling and laughing, almost as if it was satisfied with how easy it took me down. It turned its attention to my friend and charged at him too. In the process, it stepped on my back with one of its hooves, and it hurt like hell. I could almost feel a bruise coming up just seconds later. The next thing I know, both the creatures and my friend were wrestling on the ground, and I could hear the sound of tearing clothing. The beast was ripping his shirt apart, piece by piece. And suddenly, I heard a familiar sound and saw a blast of light coming from between them, and the creature let out a groan of pain and backed off from my friend. I could see him slowly get up without a shirt, with a taser in his hand that was still sparking. I never knew he carried one with him, but I was glad he did. For the next few seconds, the beast and my friend stared off at each other. The taser probably hurt it enough, because it slowly backed away and retreated into the bush. I thanked my friend and we quickly went back to camp. Some days later, I did some research on the internet and stumbled upon a mythical creature. Its physical appearance matched perfectly with the creature we had met. It said that this creature can mimic human speech to lure its victims, which would explain the cry for help we had heard. I'm almost certain that this creature is not just a myth, and there's at least one lurking somewhere in Nevada. Now, while that was my crazy encounter from Nevada, Missouri has its own fair share of nightmares to share. I'll have to send more in a separate email, but I've also seen similar creatures like this, what I saw in Nevada and Missouri. In fact, I think there are more out here, lurking around in the woods. I wanted to share with you my Nevada story to let you know that I have experience with cryptids, because recently, when I was in a cabin up in the wintertime here in Missouri, I caught something with large black eyes staring into my cabin window. I tried my best not to scream, but it only came around at night. Since I got out of the cabin and have come back down the mountainside for spring, I've not seen it since. Anyway, I could go on and on about all the stories I have with dealing with these monsters. They seem to follow me, no matter what state I'm in. Let me know if you'd like to hear more, and I'll gladly write a bunch up for you. In 1992, I was living with my girlfriend, who is now my wife of 20 plus years. At the time, we lived in a small duplex in a little town outside of Edna, located outside of St. Louis. So, I was familiar with the whole legend of the Hawkman and other local sighting stories that had been popping up prior to our own sighting. Well, one afternoon, my wife and I were sitting on our couch watching TV. I remember it was around 3 p.m. As I said, we lived in a duplex, and the living room window is basically on the front corner of the house. We were sitting facing the window, and I just so happened to be looking out it when I saw what I thought was a very large flying object, or bird, flying very low, just south of our duplex. It was so large and so close, I thought it was going to smash into the roof of our apartment. We were on the second floor, but it pulled up and over a few trees, doing kind of a loop as it passed. It took about 5 seconds for my wife and I to process what we had just seen, and both came to the same conclusion. That was not a bird. This sighting has shocked us, scared us, and intrigued us both ever since. The fact that it was flying so low right in front of our house and looping over a few trees made it very real to us. I'm still not quite sure what we saw, but I'm confident this was possibly paranormal, or we really did see the Hawkman. I was hunting around 2012 November or December. I can't remember which one was which, but it wasn't too long ago, so I'm not sure why my memory is so blurry about the date. I was up in a tree stand, bow hunting for deer in the backwoods of Missouri. It was getting close to dusk, and I had not seen anything all day. I was just sitting there, dozing off a bit, when I heard something coming through the woods towards me. At first, I thought it was a deer, but then I noticed that it was walking on 2 legs and coming up the path towards where my tree stand is. I could see and make out that it was a large, hairy, dog-like creature, easily 8 feet tall and massive, rippling muscles. It was also walking upright, the same way a man would. I didn't know what to do. I sat there and watched it as it came closer. It was looking right up at me, and I could see its eyes. I was terrified. I couldn't move. Then, everything around me got quiet. I was too frightened to look out my deer stand to see if it was still there, so I sat there waiting for it to go away. I honestly don't know how long I waited, but eventually I must have dozed off. The next thing I know, the sounds of the forest start coming back. I was probably sitting up there for a good couple of hours before things returned to normal. I know it saw me. I know that for a fact. I don't know what it was, but it definitely was not a regular deer or wolf, or any other kind of animal I'd ever seen before. I called out to a couple of my buddies and told them what had happened. One of them said he knew somebody who had a very similar experience as I. He said the creature was called the Missouri Wildman. I never did find anything with that information because, honestly, after that day, I didn't think I wanted to know anything more. I just kind of want to forget that it ever happened. I never did see this thing again. But since that day, strange things have been happening around my house. Like, for example, I usually leave my porch light on at night. But ever since, this strange looming feeling sits around my house that makes me feel uncomfortable, like there's something there. There's even times that I swear I see those same red eyes staring back at me through the woodline by my house. Or I get this overwhelming sensation that I'm being watched by something or someone. I can never get a good look at it, though. The whole thing has left me shaken. I'm still trying to find ways to process it after all these years. Because how do you handle something like this? Something that you're told your whole life doesn't exist, and then turns out to be true. So, I came across this subreddit based on the unexplained sightings and experiences when something happened with me that left me quite disturbed. I began to look it up on the internet, and I found a lot of the nighttime. Isolated accounts quite similar to what I had experienced just several weeks back. And it went something like this. Born and raised in Missouri, and I've always wanted to get a dog ever since I was little. But I couldn't get one. My mother was asthmatic, and my dad had a severe allergy to dogs. I moved out a few weeks ago, and found myself a really great apartment, a room that I share with one of my friends. I had no intention of adopting a dog yet, but my friend, who's also my roommate, so I'll call him roommate in the story to avoid any confusion. He brought a few months old puppy with him one day. It was the most adorable thing I'd ever seen. The pupper looked like a mixed breed of German Shepherd and Border Collie. It was sleeping in my roommate's arms. I asked him if it was his. Much to my surprise, he told me that on his way back home, a car had hit its mother, and the pupper was left behind. Since my roommate felt bad about it, because he knew of my love for dogs, he brought it home for me. I was of course sad about the puppy, but at the same time, I was overjoyed at the fact that I could finally have a dog. I'm not really a morning person, so I try and sleep in for as long as I can before absolutely needing to get up out of bed. Getting a dog meant that I had to walk it out too. His name is Archie, by the way. The first week, Archie licked my face clean and would not stop unless I was out of bed. So what I found as a solution was that I walked Archie twice in 24 hours, once in the morning and once at night, so he wouldn't insist on going out so early in the morning. And it surprisingly has been working out quite well. A few days ago, when I was taking Archie out on a walk, there's a quiet, spooky cemetery we passed by. It has tall, creepy, incredibly dense trees. There's a footpath on the side. Then there's a road next to it, and then there are dense bushes on the other side of the road as well. We always walk on the footpath that's closer to the bushes, so the cemetery is on the far side of the road. We were walking there, and absolutely no noise around us. We try to be quiet as well so we don't disturb the neighbors. Archie and I start to walk past the cemetery when we hear a very loud rustling in one of the trees in the cemetery. Archie and I both stop and stare. The rustling and noise was too small to be that of an owl's or a bird's. Archie hid behind my legs and whimpered while I had my eyes glued the entire time at the tree, trying to find out exactly what it was. Then, I see a big shadow walk past, quickly, from a branch, towards the trunk of one of the trees. I could tell from that silhouette that it was illuminated by the full moon that night. I was scared, but I still wanted to know what the heck was jumping trees and who was doing it. I stayed rooted to the spot. It wasn't until I saw the figure crawl down the tree and fall with a loud thud in the bushes beneath. By that time, I had gotten the chills so bad, and my body was violently shaking. I no longer had an interest in finding out who or what it was, but I could not move. It was like something kept me there in my place. I heard the rustling get closer as the thing, whatever it was, ran out of the cemetery, crawling on all fours, crossing the road only to disappear in the bushes on my side. That was it. I grabbed my dog in my arms, running in the opposite direction as fast as I could. I kept looking back to see if the crawler thing was following me, and my heart almost stopped. I noticed it was. All I could see was reflective eyes and a creepy thing trying to catch up to me. Instinctively, I unbuckled Archie's collar, threw it back to him to aim at this crawler, but I didn't know if it hit him or not. I didn't turn around and keep running, going around corners. I stopped hearing the sound of steps behind me, after which I glanced back to check if it had finally given up, and I was so glad it wasn't there anymore. Without stopping to catch my breath, I still did not stop running the entire time, and took the longer route back to my apartment, which took like 15 more minutes of running. When I entered and slammed the door behind me, my roommate woke up from the noise, asking me what the matter was, since he saw the state I was in. I told him about the crawler. It didn't look like he believed me, but he agreed that he had heard of weird things from the cemetery and sightings nearby at night. He also said he always found it spooky, and what I saw could be an animal that was a false consolation. We both knew there's a city after a city where I live with no forest or trees or wild area or any sort of thing from where that thing could have came from. I know Missouri is wild, but I never knew it had things like this in it. Maybe I should move states. Greetings. I've been reading your work for a long time, and today, I'm going to be sharing one of my own experiences with you. This event took place back when I was around 13 or 14. My friends and I were looking for strange phenomena in the woods near our neighborhood. We had heard about the local legends of a supposed vampire who roamed around the area, near a ravine down by the creek. Apparently, it was attacking people and drinking their blood. You know how stories circulate when you're that age. You hear all sorts of stuff. Doesn't necessarily make it true. So, being that young, thrilling and looking for an adventure, we would sometimes go out at night to look for any other sort of strange creatures that were there to haunt this forest and creek near us. One evening, we went down to the ravine, which lies between two streets, in an attempt to capture something on film, if we can find anything out there. Of course, we didn't find any vampires, but we did find something much, much worse. Actually, we didn't see it at first. We only heard it when it howled, and I was frightened to death and ran like a bat out of hell back home. So did my friends too. They weren't going to stick around any longer than they had to. After all, we were just babies. The next night, we decided we would try and be much more brave. So, we waited for our parents to fall asleep before slipping out of the house. In fact, my friend was so clever, he had actually recorded himself snoring, put it on a tape player, set it in his bedroom, and put it on loop. So, if you put your ear up to the door, it would sound like he was snoring, and this looped over and over again. The antics young kids go through just to sneak out. Anyway, once we made it back down by the creek again, we were thinking we were cool ghost hunters and ignored the threat from the night before. We were skinning around the creek. I had borrowed my dad's high-powered LED flashlight. I think it's something like 9,000 lumens or something, I can't exactly remember. I'm shining it around, trying to see if we can find anything, and we hear the growl again. And this time, we all panic, literally freezing up in terror at what we're hearing. Whatever is responsible for making this growl sounds much larger than any animal we could have ever anticipated. While we were expecting to find a vampire, we didn't find that, but here's what was about to happen. We shone the light where the noise came from, and that's when we saw movement. At first, it started as a shadow, and it was kind of almost bouncing back and forth between the trees. We were having a hard time comprehending what we were seeing until a head popped out. This head, mind you, is by far the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. Far scarier than any horror movie, and far more realistic as well. I wish I could tell you what it was, and part of me wants to say it was a werewolf, but it didn't look exactly canid like you would expect. No, It was more like a minotaur, or kind of that of a deer head, if that makes sense. I think deer are a form of stag, so I'll go with that. Imagine crossing a wolf with a stag, and also kind of having these short horns protruding from the back of its head, like spines do. But its snout was really exaggerated, kind of like a caiman, but not as long and slender, but how it's just exaggerated. It had several rows of teeth, and it looked very, very mean. The eyes reminded me of a mix between a cat's and a reptile's, slightly glowing but very, very sharp and cold-looking. It was also covered in this jet black hair, and it looked pissed, even more pissed as we were shining our light right in its face. Even the expression it wore was, we needed to leave, and now. I'd like to say we sat there and thoroughly observed it, recalling every detail, but truth be told, the second our light illuminated its face, we dropped the light, ran back screaming like little girls, all the way up the ravine, and that was the last time we ever went down to the creek after midnight. After that, we didn't talk about the legend of the vampire, because we knew the truth. There was no such thing as a vampire. Instead, something much more evil and deadly ruled that creek at nighttime. And to this day, I'm not sure what it was, but I know what. I bet that we were about to be its next meal, had we stuck around and tried to ask it questions. I still have pretty bad nightmares about that thing to this day. Dreams that it chases me, holds me down and begins ripping off each of my limbs before eating and ripping me apart. It's taken a long time, but even now, I don't think I'll ever forget about it. This was many years ago. I'm 42 now, so this would have been sometime in 2002 or 2003. One of my friends who I was with that day is still traumatized by this. The other two friends I've lost contact with, just from moving away and whatnot. And lastly, I really wouldn't consider myself a fan or somebody who's interested in the paranormal, but I definitely can respect it, and know there are things and creatures and beings and life forms and entities that exist. And I think that the universe doesn't care if we can or can't understand it. It's going to continue to operate the way it operates. That's just my personal philosophy. Anyway, let me know if you enjoyed the story. If you do, feel free to share it with anybody and everybody you know. This happened to me about 10 years ago. It was in mid-July. You could say in the middle of nowhere. I was with my fiancée, on our way to a family gathering. We were going to my grandparents' house, where my parents, siblings, and cousins were going to celebrate my engagement. I had proposed to her on my birthday, on July 10th. We had made plans to go visit her family, once we were able to fly out to their state. I was also super excited to see my family again. I had not seen my brothers and my sister since Thanksgiving the previous year. I had been dating this girl, whom we'll call Amy, for 3 years, before we had got engaged, and all of her family adored her. When I called my parents to tell them the news, they were thrilled and immediately made arrangements for all of us to gather at my grandparents' place to celebrate. It was going to be over the weekend, and we were going to get there on a Friday afternoon. We packed our stuff over the weekend, and were going to get out there on a Friday afternoon. We packed our stuff into my car, heading out. It was going to be about a 10-hour drive. We thought we'd stop along the way to get some rest. So, we left our home on a Thursday evening. Right at the middle point of the road, we were going to stop at a hotel, spending the night after breakfast. That's when we would continue our trip. The story I'm telling you about started happening roughly 3 or so hours after our trip began. I was driving through this thick, tall forest that was stretching over both sides of the road. It was probably around 9, maybe 9:15 at night at this point. It was already very dark out. The road was empty. We hadn't come across any cars going through in the past hour or so. I had filled my tank with gas before we left the city, so I would not have to worry about it throughout the trip. Unfortunately, that was not enough, and I still don't know what exactly happened. As we're driving down this empty road, I realized that I needed to go to the bathroom. I thought I would pull over, get out of my car, and do my business, and we'd be on our way home in no time. So I did, and as I got back into my car, I tried to start it, and it wouldn't. I tried about 3 times, but it would not start. I guess my car battery might have died, or it was another electronical issue. Whatever it was, we were stranded now in the middle of nowhere, and as it usually happens, neither of us had service. So, calling somebody for help was not an option. We probably waited there for another 30 minutes. No cars had passed by, so no help. At one point, I was standing in the middle of the road, and as I turned to the car, I saw Amy looking into the trees. But she was focused on the woods, and she ignored me when I called out to her. I approached her slowly, trying to ask what was wrong, but she still did not say a word. I looked in the direction she was staring at, and it was pitch black. Just nothing. I was beginning to worry. I went into full panic mode once she started walking into the woods. She was walking fast, not even looking where she was stepping, just blindly marching on. I had no choice but to follow her. I was stumbling, trying my hardest to keep up with her. This lasted for about 30 minutes until she stopped. She was visibly distressed and kept telling me about how she had heard screams, and it sounded like it was a child. I had heard nothing, but I still couldn't hear anything. She insisted that it was just as intense as it was before, only louder, as if we're getting closer to it. We continued together. She was a little more calm, but still seemed like she was hypnotized. So, we're walking through this thick forest. It's nighttime, and we're getting further and further away from the road. At this point, it had probably been about an hour, and out of the corner of my eye, to our left, I could see something walking alongside us. It looked like a rabbit, I swear. I can also swear that it had glowing blue eyes. I know that she saw it too, but she was unfazed, if not even slightly calmer. I occasionally turned to the rabbit to check if it was still following us, and it was. I asked what was happening, but Amy did not say a word. I asked again and got the answer. The voice was deep and kind of distorted, like it was coming out of a speaker, but it came from behind us. It was the rabbit. It said that we just had to keep walking, and that it was going to be okay. I looked at Amy and she looked at me, but none of us said anything. We walked for a while before we could see the woods, and we were becoming less dense. Right out of the forest, we saw the road and a police car with lights. We picked up our pace as we're getting close to the end of the forest. The voice said that it's over. We're out now. It's gone. And the strange rabbit was gone too. We walked out onto the road, and it was indeed a police officer, looking at another car parked on the side of the road, on the opposite side of where we came out of the woods. It was our car. We ran up to him, asking him if he had come here for us. He told us that somebody called the police because they drove past an abandoned car. We asked him to follow us out of the part of the road. We were scared and almost lost. He did as we asked, and after we were out there, we drove straight to my grandparents'. I didn't want to stop anymore. Look, the weekend was lovely and all, but I can never shake the eerie feeling for days after that. My grandparents have now been both dead for 5 years, and my family stole their house, so we don't ever go there anymore. However, while they're still alive, my wife and I never took that road again. It would have taken us a couple more hours, but knowing that we would never experience whatever that was made it all the worthwhile. My encounter with the bizarre beast in the woods of northern New Jersey haunts me to this very day. On May 16th, 2012, I, along with my 3 brothers and 2 friends, went camping at a local state park, right near our hometown. The park is known for being deep in the woods and having a large swamp nearby called Crescent Lake. We are all experienced campers, but had never been to this particular campsite before. The site was primitive. It consisted of one fire pit, a picnic table, and an outhouse. In other words, pure heaven for us city kids. The plan was simple. 2 tents, 1 sleeping bag, between 2 people. There were 4 of us. Food and water purifiers / filtration systems from a company that I can't mention. And lots of fun. We arrived late in the afternoon and set up camp. After dinner, we took a hike around the park to check out the sights. It was then we came across the swamps. The swamp is a large, murky body of water that's said to be inhabited by all sorts of creatures, including the legendary swamp monster. Now, I'm not one to believe in monsters, but there is something undeniably eerie about this swamp. The trees were so thick and the water so dark, it felt like you can get lost in there forever. And then there was the smell, a mixture of rotting vegetation and stagnant water that made your stomach turn. We didn't spend too much time near the swamp. When we got back to the campsite, we played some card games and went to sleep right around 11 p.m. We all woke up around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom, so we decided to stay awake a little longer and sing a song by the campfire. That's when things began to get weird. I was sitting at the fire pit with my back turned away from the woods when I heard what sounded like heavy footfall coming from deep within the forest. The steps were loud enough. They caused loose dirt and rocks on the ground near me to shake. I thought maybe somebody was playing a prank, but I didn't know anybody who would be this crazy. Once again, I didn't think too much of it, at least mental breakdown status, until what happened. At first, I heard a loud crash, followed by the snapping of branches and trees. It was as if something very large had fallen and knocked an entire tree or 2 over. At this point, it sounded like whatever it was had begun heading right towards our camp. As frightened as I was, I still could not see anything. There were so many trees blocking my view, not knowing what to do. I ran back to our tent and woke up my brother, who decided to catch some extra Z's that night. We tried to stay as quiet as possible, waking up our friends by shaking them gently. They did not take too kindly to the abrupt awakening at first, but after explaining what we'd heard, they quickly got up, grabbed their gear, and we all met back at the fire pit and watched whatever it was move closer and closer to the campsite, slowly. It was then we realized there was more than one of them. 5 of them, actually, and each making a grunting noise as they walked. They were walking on all 4s like animals, their skin a deep green color, with spikes and spines running down their bodies and backs. We could see their yellow eyes glowing in the darkness, and the smell of rotting vegetation had gotten even stronger now. We could hear the swamp water sloshing around as they made their way towards us. We didn't know what to do. We were terrified. One of these creatures leapt up onto the picnic table, and in one quick motion, snatched one of our backpacks. The others followed suit and began grabbing whatever they could. Eventually, they got tired of raiding our camp, moved back into the woods. We just stood there, watching as they disappeared into the darkness. It was only then we realized how lucky we'd been. If they decided to attack us, we would have been done for. We quickly packed up and never looked back. The experience, as strange as it was enough to convince me there are literally monsters lurking in the swamps and woods of this world. I hope to never encounter them ever again. In June of 2015, I was camping in the local state forest. My buddies and I were heading up to our campsite, coming off a muddy trail. We decided to go down another trail. It looked like it would be much more fun. This path in particular led through an area that is mostly evergreens with some deciduous trees intermixed. It's very secluded, but you can hear vehicles on the main road if they are loud enough. Even up where we were, which was about 3/4 of a mile from the nearest main road. A few minutes after walking through this area, I heard something following us. At first, I thought it might have been some other fellow campers, but as soon as we stopped and stood still for a minute to listen, we could hear whatever it was continue moving. This went on for a few more moments, and we decided to start running through the woods with our gear in hand, get back to our vehicles behind us. We did make it out safely, but when I came back a few days later with my dad and 2 dogs, our stuff had been moved around. We were missing our MREs and some other small things. Well, I stayed around, and that night, I heard small footsteps in the woods near our campsite again, roughly about an hour after dark. A few nights later, while sitting in my car at 1 a.m., something loud banged against the side of my car, causing me to jump out of my skin. It sounded like something hard smacking the car. I got out to investigate and noticed not only was there no wind, but the forest around me was absolutely silent, save for the sound of a few crickets managing to let loose any noise they could muster. I've not been back there since due to the lack of courage. However, I'll try to be back sometime in the next coming months. This is my favorite place to go camping after all. My friend who did go with me, and he has visited before, says he heard something following us again when we were leaving, and even saw some blue orbs floating around our car while we were driving down one of the main roads near where we parked. He does not remember hearing that part, though, until later. When we returned a couple of months later to investigate, we had found strange markings on the trees that looked like deep claw marks. Hello. So this is an update. We went back to the forest and found some weird things near where we were camping. First of all, there's a circle around 30 feet in diameter, completely devoid of any leaves or anything, and also has 3 evenly spaced holes in about 8 inches wide and 2 feet deep. Around this circle are 4 smaller ones that go outward from the center, about 15 degrees apart. The ground was flattened around these circles as if they had been made recently. Some people say this could have just been caused by rain or snow, but I don't believe it, because there was not any. In addition to those 4 circles on the ground, there were 3 trees that had these strange claw markings on them. They did not look like bear marks. They went from the ground to about 12 feet high, and looked like they were made by a large animal with very long nails. Could this be something like a Bigfoot out in the woods? Some people do believe in Bigfoot or Sasquatch, and if this is real, it would make sense since supposedly it lives in the forests of North America. And I know there have been numerous sightings of Bigfoot over the years, even some purported evidence, but there's never been any conclusive proof he exists. While some people say he's an ape-like creature that has lived in North America since the Ice Age, some say he's humanoid and stands around 10 feet tall. Maybe this phenomena is truly caused by Bigfoot, or something similar like wild men, ape men, wild Indians, etc. Or maybe it was just some natural occurrence. I'll leave that up to you to decide. However, after doing some research, it seems that the claw markings and odd markings could have possibly been made by a black bear, but it's just the markings don't add up. I was at a campground in Connecticut, just across from the Massachusetts border. I've been going to this spot for years now, and it's somewhat remote from any towns. It's a fairly decent-sized piece of land with 2 rivers running through parts of it. There are about 9 main sites that people go to, but there are plenty of other places around the area, if you know where to look. On clear nights, you can easily see other spots as far as New York City and Boston on a good night, even Rhode Island. On a cloudy night, you would never know they were there, unless you had high-powered binoculars and high-powered LED lights, which I do not own those things, because they tend to attract negative attention from those who should not be messing around with that type of equipment. Anyway, on the night in question, there were 2 people occupying the site next to ours, which is rare. It's usually just me and my dog. We were all talking around the campfire, and they asked if I'd ever seen anything strange in the sky. I told them about the time I saw a triangular-shaped object years back. They said, too, they had seen something similar, but it was more diamond in shape. We all looked up at the sky, and sure enough, there it was, very high up and moving slowly from east to west. It was too far away to make out any real details, but it definitely looked like a UFO. We sat there in disbelief for a few moments and began talking about it once again, and also after it was gone. This was in October of 2014. I've also told my friends, but they don't believe me or think I'm crazy for this, so that's why I'm sending you this email. It was definitely a UFO, and my dog also acted very strange before, during, and after he saw it. He usually barks at strangers walking by our site, but he did not make a sound the entire time this thing was visible. I was camping with a small group of friends in northern Minnesota. It was during the fall, and we were deep in the woods at a very remote spot, so as you can imagine, we didn't see another soul for miles. We had been hunting and fishing all day, and decided to stop early, settling into our tents for the night. I chose to sleep by myself. It's usually more comfortable that way. Everybody else opted to set up camp together and talk my ear off, but I really wanted some peace and quiet. That's how I like to do things. Solo, until I feel like socializing again. So, after setting up my tent and laying out my sleeping bag and pillow on top of it, securing all my food away in the beer canister and double-checking that I had my knife, I climbed in, zipped up the tent door. It was probably only about 7:30 at night, but I was ready to check in. Just as I was dozing off, I heard a loud, sharp yip right outside my tent. It sounded like a dog, but it was strange. Dogs sound different, and this thing made a quick, high-pitched noise. And immediately, I knew something wasn't right. All the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a cold sweat break out over my body. I unzipped the tent door to see what was making the noise, and there, standing about 20 yards away from me, was a large black wolf staring intently at me. He looked at me for a moment, then growled before turning and disappearing into the darkness. When I first saw him, I was too scared to move or even scream. But after he was gone, however, I found that all my fear had dissipated and was immediately replaced by anger. It actually took everything in me not to run after that wolf and kill it. I asked if there could have been any other animals making this noise because it seemed so out of place. The thing is, it didn't sound anything like a regular wolf. This thing was something bigger, something more evil, something that we should be hunting, or it could be hunting us. I can't explain these sudden emotions that came over me, the going from fear and panic to wanting to kill it. It's like it placed a spirit of anger over me. I believe that now that I know more, this could have been a Dogman, or something of the supernatural realm. The way it had control over me. Possibly a demon manifesting physically. I don't know. I've heard stories of Dogman before, but I didn't know if they were real or not. And I cannot say for certain that this is exactly what that was. However, it's definitely made me more curious about the legends. I'm in the military. I've been in there for almost 4 years now. I'm still in E3, which is very low enlisted. The only real responsibilities I have are to conduct foot patrols and report any irregularities back to my superiors. I had been stationed in Iraq for 2 years before being sent home for medical reasons. My kidneys were apparently failing. Anyway, I'm stationed at home now and have been for almost 2 years. The experience I'm about to share with you happened about a month ago. I'm posting this because I'm working on transferring to a different unit within the military. I cannot go into detail about what really happened, but I want you to know that this all is not BS, and it actually happened. Even now, the whole thing feels so surreal to me. I still can't believe it happened. I was told by some of my friends that it was just a dream, but I know darn well that it wasn't. I know what I saw, and I know the sounds and everything I experienced was real. This was in September of 2020. I was conducting a foot patrol with my squad. We had just finished our 4th hour of patrolling and were going back towards the outpost where we were being housed while on duty. This was in Nevada. It was about 2100, maybe 2200 hours when it happened. I'm also a very logical person, so I tend to think in a way that is much more scientific. Even with all my common sense saying it wasn't real, something deep inside of me knew that what was happening was real. I only have one interest, and that's science. So, we were about halfway back to the outpost when one of my squad mates, who was walking about 10 feet in front of me, began to scream. I remember thinking to myself, there's a hostile. I began running towards him, and as I got closer, I saw what he saw. There was this huge glowing apparition that had materialized in the sky, like a ghost or something. It was shaped like an upside-down triangle, with what appeared to be 6 black appendages coming out of it. The whole thing was illuminated in this bright white light. It began descending slowly and almost fell into the field nearby my squad mate's position. I looked over at my other squad mates who were all freaking out. I could see the fear in their eyes. They did not want to go anywhere near this thing. There was something extremely unnatural about what we saw, but that's probably a given. None of us wanted anything to do with it. And all of a sudden, there was this really loud noise that sounded like metal being ripped apart. And then, the bright white light started getting closer. I was so scared at this point, I don't really remember much of it. I remember waking up behind a bush, about 50 meters away from where I first saw the thing. Everybody else, including myself, had disappeared, as if they were all abducted. I have no idea what happened to them. Even my background in the military and training did not prepare me for what I experienced. Nothing could have prepared me for that. I'm surprised I'm not in a mental hospital right now. Thinking that whatever that thing was, it was after us. It was like it was deliberately trying to come after. I have no idea what it was. Maybe an alien, a ghost, a UFO. I don't know. Since this time, I've been having horrific nightmares just about every night. The sound of that metal being ripped apart still haunts me. I don't know what to make of it, but I just hope that whatever that thing was is gone now. And the shape of that thing, and what were those appendages. I've also not had any other experiences like this, but I've had friends and family tell me about some pretty weird things that happened in and around Nevada. I'm also not really at liberty to talk about the entire event, because we were supposed to sign a non-disclosure agreement when the incident happened. Even now, I still can't believe what I saw. It was like something out of a horror movie. I just hope that whatever it was is gone now and never comes back. I don't know if I could handle seeing something like that again. I grew up at Walker River Reservation. My grandparents are buried there. I have spent countless hours exploring that area, whether it be by boat or four-wheeler or just walking around. There's a particular part of that river that is probably about 15 to 20 miles from where I grew up, and has always been a favorite fishing spot of mine. However, one day, I had an encounter that will forever be burned into my memory. I'm posting this because I feel it's important for people to be aware of what is out there. I'm not looking for attention, and I don't want to come across as some crazy person. I think it's something that should be shared. Even now as I write this, it sends a chill up my spine. I have not told anybody about this experience until now. I'm not sure if these are things related to the sighting of Bigfoot or other cryptids, but whatever they are, I've seen them with my own 2 eyes, and that is enough for me. This was in late summer of 2016, around 9 p.m. I was on my way home from fishing and had just turned down the road that leads to our house. Now, the road is about a mile long, and is fairly straight. I'm also a big fan of cryptids, paranormal, and things like that. I've been to the Bermuda Triangle a few times as well as some other places that I won't mention. I'm ready for whatever may come from posting this. Like I said, it's something I've never really talked about until now. So, I was on my way home from fishing with a couple of buddies. I began to head down the road that leads straight right to our house. The stars were out, and it was late summer, so it wasn't too dark yet, but enough where you can kind of see the moon and stars. We got maybe halfway through the mile-long stretch of road, and both me and my buddy in the back seat saw something large in the air. It was a huge, dark-colored thing that flew from left to right, just above the tree line. I would say it was about 50 yards away, too far to make out exactly what it was. But when you see something that big flying through the air, your mind will probably jump to conclusions. It startled me. It did not seem to make any noise. It was about the size of a pickup truck, with looked like wings outstretched on both sides. It flew pretty slow until it went over the trees. When I say wingspan, I mean it had to be at least 20 feet wide. After that, my buddy and I just looked at each other. After that, we just kind of continued to shake it off and continue the rest of the way home. We've not gone back down there since after sunset, since this happened. I wish I could tell you a few things what the body looked like, but it happened so quick and was too dark to make out any distinguishing features. We were thinking it could have been some kind of huge bird or something, but it was far too big. Maybe a dragon or a gargoyle or something of some kind. We just kind of shook it off and tried to go the rest of the way home. I don't know what to think about it, honestly. I've always considered myself a pretty logical and rational person. This experience doesn't really fit into the realm of logic for some reason. I'm not sure if these things are related to the sighting of Bigfoot or not, but anyway, I thought it would be interesting to share with you, because even now as I write this, I kind of get a chill thinking back to it. You're actually the first person I've told this experience to, so be happy about that. I was actually planning on not even telling anybody about this. I didn't feel like anybody believed me, but after speaking to family and friends, they convinced me it was probably a good idea to put this out somewhere on the World Wide Web. Maybe other people would be able to share similar experiences with me. And maybe there were other people in Nevada that have had similar sightings like I had. I have a PhD in clinical psychology and have been a consultant/subject matter expert for local, state, and federal government agencies, as well as several international organizations for well over 25 years. I am also a certified law enforcement officer and have been serving since 1985. I also have extensive training and experience in the use of firearms. I'm currently a reserve officer for a local PD. On my off times, I have joined a Native American team to search for Native American artifacts. I have always held and been intrigued by hominids called Sasquatch, Bigfoot, etc. Well, I've never seen one. I've had some interesting experiences over the years that have led me to believe of their existence. I would deem myself and what I've done as credible. I'm hoping that by sharing this encounter with you, you will post it. I would very much like to know if anybody else has had something similar happen. Even now, half a year later, I can recall the smell so vividly. It was raw, decaying flesh. The only way I can really describe it is that like when you walk into a butcher shop. The animal I smelt at that time, even though they were roughly 125 yards away from me and were facing me, was a Dogman. The head of the animal was distinctly canine, but its body was very stocky, covered with long hair. The tail was bushy and thick. I could not see the legs clearly, but I could tell it was bipedal. The shoulders were also very wide in comparison to the hips. I'm about 6 foot even, and the shoulder of the animal were as wide as me. The eyes of the thing were very intense and did not blink. The nose was long and black, and the mouth was very large. However, I'm getting ahead of myself here. This was during the fall of 2013. I was on a team searching for Native American artifacts near Granite Peak, Nevada, which is roughly 4 hours or so from Reno, Nevada. The terrain was very rugged, and the elevation climbed from just over 4,000 feet up to nearly 10,000. The area we were in was not heavily populated and was mostly used by hunters and hikers. We were about a half mile from the top of the peak, in an area that had been searched before, but we were still finding new artifacts. It was getting later in the day, and we were all ready to head back down. The sun was going down, and a storm was brewing. Another member of our team was standing about 150 yards from me, facing the opposite direction. He was facing our vehicles, and I was on his right side. The terrain was very rugged, but had tall sagebrush covering it. The area was about 30 yards wide and went up the hill for roughly 100 yards, then leveled off. It was at this time that I smelt the most intense smell of rotting animal flesh I've ever smelt in my life. It was so strong, it made me nauseous. I immediately knew that whatever had produced that smell was close by. I turned to my right and saw the animal I would later learn to identify as a Dogman. It was roughly 125 yards away and walking away from me. I estimated the height to be about the same as me, 6 feet. The shoulders were very wide, and the head was distinctly canine. The hair was roughly 2 to 3 inches long. I could not see the legs as clearly, but they were long and bipedal. The shoulders were also very thick and stocky. When it turned to look at me, I could see that its eyes were very dark, almost black. It looked over my way several times. The nose, too, was long, and the mouth appeared to be full of very large teeth that looked almost crocodilian. The ears were also very tall, exaggerated, and perky. It continued to walk away from me and passed out of my sight. The smell lingered in the area for 10 minutes. Me and several others also saw this thing and smelt that same horrible odor. We do not talk about it much because we fear ridicule. Me and a few of my friends have been searching the area since and have not smelt or seen anything like what we did that day. I have only sent this experience to a few people. My family knows about it, and I've spoken with 2 of the members of my team, but the other members did not see it. It almost looked demonic in appearance. It was very frightening, but I know that it wanted us to be afraid. It knows that we are not a threat, and that is why it did not attack. I can't help but feel like it was almost taunting us in a way, that it knew we were weak. Even though it was walking away from us, it was watching us, making sure we weren't going to follow it at the same time. The whole thing was very strange. Since I have come forward with this information, I have had several people tell me that they know somebody who has also seen this thing. It seems to be gaining more and more attention. I just hope that by coming forward, we can get a better understanding of what this thing is and what it wants. Thank you for taking the time to read my story. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. I'm 32 years old, male, married, 1 child. I've worked as a head chef at a very high-end restaurant in the Atlanta metro area. I've also done some catering on the side. With that said, I grew up in a very small town in Georgia, in the foothills of the North Georgia mountains. My entire family has been in that area since the early 1800s. I've also been hunting and fishing most of my life and don't scare easily. I spend a lot of time in the woods and on the water. I am by no means an expert, but am very comfortable in the outdoors. I have never seen anything like this creature, and I am certain it was not a bear. I've hunted bear, and I know very well what they look like. This is nothing I could explain away, and in a sense haunted me. This took place just outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. I don't want people coming here trying to hurt it, because it never touched any of my animals. The sighting happened in the early morning hours, just right around sunrise. I was out driving around, heading north. Where I'm at is pretty much in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by desert and mountains. And I saw something off in the distance. Upon getting closer to it, because it was near the road, I could see this huge creature walking along the desert floor, heading in my direction. I estimate it to be at least 8 or 9 feet tall and very, very broad in the shoulders. It was covered in almost black hair, and walked like you would expect a man if he was carrying too much weight on his shoulders. It only took a couple of steps and just seemed to kind of glide across the ground. What's interesting is as soon as I saw it, it quickly almost ducked or did a collapsing motion and disappeared into the tiny sagebrush. It seems impossible for anything of that size to move and disappear that quickly, but it was gone in a flash. I have never been so terrified in my life. My first reaction was to get to the back of the car and get away as possible. I was shaking for hours afterwards. I have never seen anything like this creature, but I was certain it was not a bear. I've hunted them before and I know what they look like. You can't just explain this away. For more clarity, this occurred on Highway 93 heading north out of Las Vegas, Nevada. This road parallels the east side of the Las Vegas Valley. The setting was roughly about 5:30 in the morning. I am a believer in the paranormal, and have had several experiences with what I believe to be otherworldly beings. With that said, I am not somebody who's just seen an alien. I'm just a normal guy with some experiences that has given me enough knowledge and belief to know that strange things exist. I feel it is important to share my sighting with as many people as possible in the hopes that maybe somebody else who's seen something similar can come forward or help me with the description of what I saw. Now, while out driving near a small town of Crystal Springs, Nevada, on October 7th, 2018, I observed what I can only describe as a very pale humanoid. It was very thin, with long, gangly arms and legs. Its skin was pale white, almost translucent. I could see the veins and bones underneath. Its hair was light brown and stringy, and it had large, dark circles for its eyes. Its face was long and chin was pointed. The nose was long and narrow. The face kind of reminded me of those cartoons where the person would get their face sucked into a vacuum, and their face would be so distorted and long. But there was no features that were necessarily pronounced. I did not see any lips, and the mouth was just a thin line, from what I could barely tell. The bone structure of the forehead was also very, very hard. Its eyes, as I already said, were very large and dark, and it stared at me with a very intense look of fear and sadness. I was shocked by what I was seeing, slamming on the brakes of my car. I even pulled off to the side of the road, and I watched it as it quickly fled away from me, disappearing into the tall grass. This being or creature seemed afraid of me. I'm not sure what I saw. Could it have been a human experiment? It's likely, but I don't think it was a human being. It could have been an alien, possibly a demon, or some other type of creature. But why was it afraid of me? That's the gist of what I got. I'm grateful that I was able to see it, and that it did not harm me. I'm scared to think about what could have happened if it had or tried to. I did not sense any form of malevolence from this creature. It was just an intense sadness or fear. I've never experienced anything remotely like this in my life. I think maybe perhaps this was an alien, or some type of otherworldly being. I'm just speculating. Perhaps it really was a demon. I've just never seen anything like this before. And honestly, thinking back to it makes all the hair on my body stand up. Because, as innocent as it was, if you could even call this innocent, it did not try to hurt me. But the sight alone was still terrifying. I'm so puzzled and confused, I don't know what to think. I have a mixture of emotions on it. I've had a hard time sleeping since this happened. This thing just won't leave my mind. But not like nightmares, just more of curiosity and wondering what to do, what to make of it, and more importantly, the questions I should be asking. I wanted to know, are there other people who have seen any sort of similar creature around Nevada or any other bordering states? Is it common for you to find creatures that are afraid of you, like this one was, and did not seem intent on being evil? I think the fear for me in this sighting was more just so seeing what I was and how shocking it was, not because this being or creature emitted fear or anything evil, like a bad aura.